Hello everyone, welcome back to stream. Aaron Weiss, nice to see you again. Yesterday we watched a bunch of videos. Actually, no, that's kind of a lie. We only watched a few videos and I forgot to queue up the playlist. Alright. So, trying to remember what we watched other than the AI thing, because that one just kind of blew my mind last night. Right. So, we watched The Rise of Hidetaka Miyazaki by Don Don RV or Don Don RV. I don't know how you pronounce that. And then, rather than watching the extra credits and Legal Eagle videos, we watched a couple ones about AI and copyright law. So I learned more about monkeys taking selfies of themselves and PETA suing behalf of those monkeys. And then we watched. Man, I should have added it to this list after the fact. I know I updated my description yesterday of what video we watched. I think it was like Solar Sands or something like that, talking about the upcoming AI epidemic. And so now I'm certain that we're living in the Terminator hellscape timeline. So you didn't realize until today Father Ariandel is a Corvi? No, yeah, he definitely is. Chubby L, welcome back. Elden Enthusiast, nice to have you guys as always. Astanex. So, after those AI videos that actually just kind of took up all of the time, and I was going to watch a Smotown one, but we didn't have enough time for that. So, today we're going to transition back into some more Elden Ring lore with Is Miquella a Fairy by Kite Tales. We did watch her follow-on video to this because I didn't know this one came first. And so there might be a little bit of redundancy between the videos, but I'm sure it'll be fine. And then after this, we will watch Where Was Farum Azula Before Its Ruin by the Elden Conspiracy. And my conspiracy is like the whole Pangea theory for the lands between. But with that said, I don't exactly know where Farum Azula should be. I would assume Caelid to an extent, but it kind of seems like it should be everywhere because of where all of its ruins landed, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And I do know like a popular theory is that Farum Azula could have been like a hub that connected all 6 of the Divine Towers, which is kind of a cool idea. So, interested to hear what Elden Conspiracy has to conspire about that one. And then this one I saw appear on my feed a couple days ago by Mr. Erik, Runes in Elden Ring, History versus Lore. So I don't know if this is going to be more of an historical perspective to compare the two or not. This is a very small channel, so I thought it'd be kind of nice to check out a lesser known content creator and see what they bring to the table. And then after that, I'm thinking we might finish this up with What Seems Illegal But Not Within the Golden Order by JakeLight. And then Why Modern MMORPGs Suck and How to Fix Them by Josh Strife Hayes. So that's what is on schedule for tonight. Hope you guys are looking forward to it. Beans and Rice, Metal Fingers, nice to have both of you guys back in the stream, as well as anybody who's lurking. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive on into our first video by Kite Tales, Is Miquella a Fairy?
Hi guys, it's Kite Tales, and boy do I have an exciting...
Alright, seems really low, I'll turn this up.
...with you today. So I just finished Duracine last week, which is FromSoft's 2018 VR.
How's the volume for you guys? This seems pretty low for me.
It was specifically made for me. I just loved it. It's officially going to be like my new favorite FromSoft game. But as I was working on a video for it, a thought crossed my mind that it may possibly be related to Miquella in a pretty big way.
Could be a little louder.
We've seen how FromSoft likes to include Easter eggs and references across their other games to different themes and different characters, and I've developed a theory that...
Yeah, it's so funny that Duracine sparked fan theories going so hard that FromSoft actually had to come out and tell the fans that, yo, Duracine does not confirm Bloodborne 2, settle down. And I think we have like Vati to really blame for a big part of that, because he made a video that's like, oh my god, Duracine is confirming Bloodborne 2 because there's a book and the Seafaring Sage. And yeah, fans were sent into a fervor, to say the least. Hey, Kello RPG, welcome in. You're not that late. Her bass pales in comparison to mine. That's pretty bad, because it's not as though I have that heavy of a bass voice either. Duracine is really nice, except for the ending. I have not played it, so Yeah, I'm not really too into the VR thing, but maybe I should like look at a let's play or something sometime.
Miquella names to different themes and different characters, and I've developed a theory that Miquella might be a reference to Deracine. Deracine takes place in an orphanage, and you play as an invisible fairy who helps the children on their little adventures. The game starts off very sweet, though it eventually does go to a very dark place in typical FromSoft fashion, but we will discuss all of that in another video. The only thing that you need to know about Deracine right now is that it's about fairies. So here's the theory that I've been cooking up since I finished that game. I think that Miquella might have actually been a fairy, and the real Miquella was kidnapped and spirited away, where he was then raised in a fairy realm where he would become known as Saint Trina. I know this idea sounds crazy at first glance, but the more I looked into it, the more evidence I kept finding to support it. So at risk of going off the deep end, I now present to you my case of Miquella the Fairy Boy. Changelings are...
And there might even be some. I should rephrase this. There might even be some preemptive Easter eggs to Miquella in games like Dark Souls 2, because the god of dreams, I believe, in that game was called Quella in the English localization. Although Dark Souls 2's localizations for all of its names is quite something. And for instance, even though he's called, or the god or goddess is called Quella in Dark Souls 2, the Japanese name in Kana is just like Nera, Nera essentially. And so I don't know exactly how they got Quella from that. Maybe Miyazaki had a list of like foreign sounding names, and then they just localized it or translated it into Japanese weirdly. I don't know. It's kind of a hard to stretch. And so, like, for instance, another weird name to me in Dark Souls 2 is like Vendrick, when essentially his name in Japanese is more along the lines of like Von Claude or something like that. Van Clad, whatever. Quella, the god of the tired Eepee. Yeah. And one of the other things that I like to reference in Dark Souls 3 is that a lot of the, what are they called? The Millwood dudes. I almost said Mira. The Millwood dudes are kind of connected to an ethereal spirit tree, or like a spirit oak in that one. And the spirit tree does appear in like the Shield of Dark Souls 2 as well. But it almost seems as though like that could have been an Easter egg hint as to an upcoming title in the FromSoft lineup. So, of course, that's just kind of like my headcanon because it sounds kind of neat. And there might have been like a nod to the titles, like how Chester may have been a nod to Bloodborne, or Yamamura may have been a nod to Sekiro. But anyway. More lore than there seems. Welcome back. You think the saint stuff is super obvious? Well, Miquella was in the tree. He was outside of it as the saint through dream stuff or whatever. The saint disappeared when Moog stole Miquella. Didn't Midir eat the Millwood tree? I don't believe so. Because you're thinking of the Abyss Dragon stuff. So, in my opinion, all references to the quote-unquote Abyss Dragon is most likely referencing the pus of man. So I think the Millwood Knights were fighting the things that were coming out of themselves, because I think one of their weapons say that they were like tailor-made for humans, which begs the question, like, what were they like fighting against? There's a weapon like that, or an item like that. Maybe it was like the torch, but I don't remember. It's been a hot minute. All right, let's go ahead and dive back on in.
Are a big part of fairy folklore. Changelings are fairies that have been swapped in place of a human, stolen by other fairies. So while the human baby would be stolen away to live its life out in the fairy realm, the changeling would benefit from the comforts provided by its human parents, as long as its true identity was never discovered. Fairies were drawn to bright, reflective things, so lots of blonde-haired babies were targets for fairy kidnappings. Miquella, the golden boy with platinum hair, would have been perfect fairy bait. Changelings could be identified by a number of different traits. For example, a fairy child may appear sickly and would not grow in size like a normal child, Or it may have been struck with infantile paralysis, a disease that would later be known as polio. They may have also displayed intelligence far beyond their years and possess uncanny insight. This description of a changeling child sounds so much like Miquella. Even though he's been cursed with eternal childhood, this doesn't stop him from flourishing intellectually, as we see with the golden needles that he fashions and the golden order incantations he creates. And appearance-wise, he very much seems to have the body of a child that might not have functioning legs. Poliomyelitis is a horrific disease that has been around.
Well, you guys heard it here first. Miquella is an albinoric confirmed.
Have functioning legs. Poliomyelitis is a horrific disease that has been around for centuries, in which the limbs of the infected person become atrophied as the muscles die, leading to eventual paralysis. This is a very apt description of the only time we actually see Miquella in-game, as his withered arm falls out of his cocoon. Miquella being cursed with permanent childhood and possibly being partially paralyzed totally fits the description of a changeling. He also very clearly has wings on his back, which has been the most iconic imagery of fairies since they were first illustrated with butterfly wings in the 1700s. But Miquella's wings look very translucent and weak, much like the nascent butterfly, which is said to appear as if it's just emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. The word nascent is described as just coming into existence and beginning to display signs of future potential. And this is such a great description for Miquella, not only.
So Chubby Owl asks, are there even fairies in Elden Ring at all? So that's a little bit of a complicated answer because we're kind of told of at least two. So the first kind of appears in the Silver Cat Ring, which says that cats are kind of fairies, or there's a fairy cat rather. It's let me look that one up. Did I misspell it? Silver Cat? Am I on the right? No, I'm totally on. Wait, why? Oh, is it not called Silver Cat Ring? Maybe just Cat Ring or something like that. Long tail cat talisman. I'm probably just like mixing up my game terminology. Lol. Wait, why did it just go away? We just had it. Long tail. Okay. Oh, because I had it in ring. That makes sense. Okay. So, a brooch depicting Lacrima, the long-tailed cat. Blah, blah, blah. Lacrima features in the fables of Raya Lucaria, in which she is described as a fairy cat who was fond of playing in the Great Bell Tower. So, that one obviously is a little bit more innocuous. And then we do have another one, I think in like the Dancer Talisman Charm or Faria, or like the Blue Cowl Swordsman set. So maybe it's just localized differently. Fairy. Yeah, that's kind of funny. All right. The dancer in blue represents a fairy who in legend bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself. So if I'm remembering correctly, this is all stated as hearsay. No, okay, so only the first part. No, okay, so it's like told. So okay, yeah. So this story here is a bit of a fable, and so this could be a metaphorical reading of a past event. And with that in mind, it might be possible to interpret the fairy itself as a river, whether that be the Shifra or Ansel River, I guess, how you pronounce it, whatever. And so these are the only two references to fairies in the game, so it's not as though we ever see like nymphs or anything adjacent to fairies elsewhere, though. And then Morlor said, you're wondering if those changeling characteristics are cherry-picked? No, as far as like those like historical references go, I don't necessarily think those are like too bad. But I will say like probably the whole like Miquella is a changeling theory is a little bit cherry picked because I feel like it tends to rely on ignoring other parts of Miquella's interactions with others. But nonetheless, I mean, it's a neat little theory, and I do enjoy like learning more about the parallels with fairies, especially if it does have some relation to another FromSoft game with Daracene. Or however you pronounce that. The blue dancer who may or may not be a river, who may or may not be whatever, it's the blue dancer. Okay. There's a ton of items in Souls games. You can't imagine how anyone keeps them straight. Well, it only helps to read them like 1,000 times. And then, even then you can still forget. Errant Vice says, you think Shifa River is named for the fairy, the Ansel River is named for the swordsman, and both are like mythological characters for the Nox, hence naming the regions as such. So, for what it's worth, Ansel as a term is a kind of a reference to a story involving fairies in real life. So, they might be both named for fairies, but you might be right in that, at least for Elden Ring, the other river could be named for the swordsman himself, or herself, I don't know. Okay, going back to the video.
Physically, as he was very literally inside a cocoon waiting to metamorphosize, but it's also reminiscent of his Halig tree. The nascent butterfly might also be related to Miquella's lily and St. Trina's lily, as all three of these items have the same description in that they are exceedingly rare to find. And in the Halig tree, there is a field of lilies and butterflies. These glowing butterflies are a variety that you can't collect, but I wonder if they're meant to be the healthy, mature version of the nascent butterfly as a reference to what Miquella may have become had his metamorphosis not been cut short. Fairies have long been associated with nature since the 16th century, thanks largely in part to a Mr. William Shakespeare who reimagined them into the mischievous, nature-loving sprites that we see them as today. I see Miquella's affiliation for flowers as a further connection to fairies. And in fact, the lily in the cover image for Deracine is what first caught my attention and got me interested in that game to begin with, because
Yeah, it does kind of look like Miquella's unalloyed gold lily just from the image. Obviously, this came first, so it's not as though this looks like that. It should be the other way around, right? Hey, Necropolis, welcome back to this stream.
Saw it and immediately thought of Miquella. Miquella was trying to grow a new Erd tree. He watered the Halig tree with his own blood. This to me illustrates that he had a direct connection to nature. A connection so powerful that even his blood was able to make the tree flourish. And when that connection was severed, the tree stopped growing for good. So if the real Miquella was kidnapped by fairies as a baby, then Mohg later kidnaps the changeling Miquella, and in his place is left a wooden corpse that you can see growing into the trunk of the Halig tree. Replacing a kidnapped child with a piece of wood that was enchanted to have the appearance of the victim was another very popular theme in fairy kidnappings. So this wooden effigy that we see of Miquella could be a nod to changeling lore. Another interesting thing I came across is the Celtic mythos around the Gruaga, who were supernatural wizards that took the form of giants, and they had this ability known as the separable soul, which allowed...
Alright, so just a little bit of constructive criticism for Kite Tales, in that the music is a little bit loud, but I don't remember it being like quite this bad in relation to your voice in your other video, so you may have like already improved on this, but okay.
Them to remove their soul from their body and place it in eggs, and then they would hide the eggs in obscure hiding places. This makes me think of Mohg appearing out of the cocoon/egg, rising up out of the blood that's pouring down Miquella's arm. There might be a little separable soul action going on here, and nothing screams obscure hiding place like hundreds of meters underneath the ground. Taking a closer look inside the cocoon, we see Miquella's withered body and his aged, drained face. His face looks much older than it should, and his body doesn't look right. But I don't know if we can make too many connections to his appearance inside the cocoon, as it's something only accessible with the camera mod, but it's extremely...
Yeah, and apparently it's just a reused model of the Morgott corpse when all of the horns are excised after his fight, so take with a big old grain of salt.
Really interesting that his appearance is so shockingly different from how it's described in game. And you just have to wonder, what on earth was Miquella growing into? Looking at etymology, Shifa River, where the cocoon is located, is an Irish name that literally translates to changeling. Ainsel River might be a reference to a medieval fairy tale called Ainsel, which translates to mine own self. It's a story about a mischievous little fairy that plays a prank on a little boy. So here we have two rivers with Celtic names, and both are references to fairies. On top of all of this, there is actual mention of a fairy in the game. The Blue Dancer charm talks of a fairy dressed in blue who bestows a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. The swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself. We know that the god of rot was sealed away beneath the Lake of Rot, and the Lake of Rot is located in Ainsel River, so I'm really liking this idea that this fairy, possibly named Ainsel, lived here, and it was thanks to its gift of the flowing sword that the god of Rot was able to be contained. The flowing curved sword is a blade that was patterned after flowing water, and legends say its master was garbed in blue. So we know that the sword given to the blind swordsman was the fairy's own sword. And to me this looks like what I'd imagine a fairy sword to look like. It's whimsical in shape, its curves, it even has a flower on it. The blue cloth set states that the blue color of its fabric symbolizes brisk waters, as fluid and flowing as the sword in the hand of its wearer. And this set looks an awful lot like the Blue Dancer charm. We know that fairies are connected to nature, so it's possible that this fairy was a water sprite or even the embodiment of the river, thus the name Ainsel River, mine own self. So we know that Miquella was very well loved, and from the description of the Bewitching branch, we are told that he has learned very well how to compel such affection. Fairies have a magical ability called Glamour, which is a powerful spell of illusion that they cast in order to make themselves more appealing or to disguise something in order to get what they want. And the Bewitching branch can be used to turn an enemy into an ally, and this sounds exactly like the effects of Glamour. The Bewitching branch is crafted with Miquella's lily and a sacramental bud. The sacramental bud is described.
I guess the very interesting thing about that, which I didn't realize or forgot about, is that it's not as though this dude becomes aggro against enemies as much as they all become aggro against others, because he would not have drawn this guy's aggro to just get slashed in the neck right there.
It's crafted with Miquella's lily.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So what else was I gonna say? Hey Jay Dixon, welcome back to the stream. Oh, right. So I don't know how relevant this is, but this is kind of like one idea that I had a while back, and it didn't really seem to pan out to any degree, so I'm a little bit reticent to share this with you guys as well. But that's kind of the fun of doing the live format, making mistakes and regretting them after the fact. So in Japanese, the term for fairy or sprite or elf is yosei, which, okay, big deal, right? One thing that I did notice is that when they're referring to things like cocoons and larvae, it's also yosei. So is that supposed to be a potential play on words? I don't really think so, but that is something that I'm going to be like more cognizant of in the future. Particularly with DLC, because in the base game, I don't really think there's enough to work with to kind of like make this really work. Although Kite Tales might feel a little bit differently. If anything, it could just connect to the whole like nascent butterfly stuff, but technically a butterfly isn't a larva anyway. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt. Hey Bella, nice to see you again. It's interesting the flowing curved sword is found being delivered to the hailing chain of procession wagon. Is that the one? Well, they both have a Knights Cavalry. The one with 2 Knights Cavalry as you're exiting the consecrated snowfield? Because I'm pretty sure you get Saint Trina's torch from the first one in the Blizzard area. Errant Vice thinks we're going to get more fairy lore in the DLC, kind of like the Londor Angel in the Ringed City. Maybe. Just remember the DLC will fix everything when we finally go to Londor.
And a sacramental bud. The sacramental bud is described as an immature bud containing fresh blood, and it's believed to originate long ago from a strain of buds cultivated with youthful sacramental blood, and we can assume that this blood belongs to Miquella. The crystal and rimmed crystal buds both describe them as a young plant, crystallized before it could mature. Very
Man, the inner pedant in me is a little bit triggered. So obviously there's a little bit of a typo here, and she may not have realized that, but this should be rhymed, and so like rhyme means ice with the one M. So just to bring that to everybody's attention, not to like call her out specifically, but just so it doesn't happen again. Now I feel like a jerk. Anyway.
Buds both describe them as a young plant crystallized before it could mature, very accurately describing what happened to Miquella. An interesting thing to note is that the sacramental bud is considered a plant, yet another connection we see to nature. The roa fruit that's found all across the lands between seem to have been inspired in name and appearance by rowan berries. Rowan trees have a very significant place in fairy lore as being a sacred tree that offered protection against witchcraft, enchantment, and also against fairies. So these roa/rowan trees could just be a neat little reference that further supports the idea of a fairy realm in the lands between. But all of this now leaves us to wonder about the fate of the real Miquella. We know that.
So this is a little bit of a weird comment to make, and I don't really mean this literally, but I have wondered whether or not roa berries are supposed to have a weird connection to eyes, like literal eyes, because of the way the yellow eyes of yellow. Well, I don't want to say like an eye of yellow is a literal eye, but let's, for the sake of argument, say that they might be something similar to an eye with their kind of inflamed yellow pus coming out of them. I wonder if an eye of yellow was originally a roa berry that was afflicted by the flame of frenzy or frenzied sickness or whatever the hell they call it in the game. Anyway, enjoy that cursed knowledge.
Lots of original content was cut about St. Trina, but thanks to a couple of people who restored a cut quest that was included in the network test version of the game, we at least have an idea of what St. Trina was involved with. The quest was about collecting dream mist from sleeping creatures to craft a potion called Dream Brew, which would reveal the deepest secrets of those who drank it. And from the St. Trina items that made it into the final release of the game, we see that they all inflict sleep, so this lines up with the cut content. But the item that stands out from the rest is the torch, and it's described as having carvings that depict St. Trina, but in adult form. The face on the torch looks extremely familiar, and I think it's almost identical to Melania, down to the obscured eyes, which might mean that
This is really funny to me, not because of like this connection made, but just because I'm immediately reminded of the other videos that compared this to like Ronnie or Melina and yeah, or Marika even. And so maybe it was in the Discord where we talked about that much. I don't know. But I think one of the more interesting aspects of the torch is like this little kind of crack that's going underneath Trina's left eye here. And I can't exactly tell if it's supposed to be analogous to the other kind of like weathering on the torch, or if it is supposed to be more eye related. But anyway, yeah, it almost feels like you can just imagine a face and it'll kind of work with it in Elden Ring. I guess maybe they're just really not all that distinct, all things considered. It's Gwendolyn. It's interesting that stuff used to actually sleep depending on the time of the day. That would have been nice if certain mobs like slept during the day, because at least in the current build of the game, there's no reason not to play at night unless you don't like dealing with bats. Because playing at night is the only way you're going to fight like optional bosses, because there's really nothing different during the day as far as I know. Gotta try you one of those grapes? What do you think it'll taste like?
In this realm, where Miquella lives as St. Trina, he wasn't cursed with eternal childhood, but rather was able to grow up. And not too far off, where you find the torch in the consecrated snowfield, is where you find the flowing curved sword. They're both being transported in the large carriages. Of course.
Well, I guess that answers that question, doesn't it? What else is it gonna say? Right, she said, oh yeah, that Trina was able to grow up. I don't necessarily think Trina had to like literally grow up as much as being in a dream that Miquella could take whatever form Miquella wanted to. So I don't really think that matters either way, though.
This connection only means something to me now that I've put this theory together, but if there is any truth at all to this fairy theory, then there might be some significance to the proximity of these two items. Fairies were believed to inflict sudden, mysterious illnesses by shooting people with invisible arrows, and these conditions were known as elf shot, since the victim had been shot with a fairy arrow. Some of these ailments included stroke, sudden pains, and sleep paralysis. All of St. Trina's items inflicting sleep would be right on the mark for fairies, and all of the recipes for items that inflict sleep are crafted with St. Trina's lily. A Midsummer's Night Dream is one of Shakespeare's most well-known plays, and it's heralded for reinventing fairies as being associated with sleep and dreams. In the play, the mischievous fairy Puck creates a love potion that is made from flowers that will charm the sleeper when it's applied to their eyes. The potion was made from a flower called Love and Idleness that was said to change from white to purple once it was struck with Cupid's arrow. This might be a deep reference if it is related, but all of St. Trina's items are purple, just like the magical flowers in A Midsummer Night's Dream. St. Trina's arrows are described as having a powerful sleep effect on their targets, and the priests of St. Trina would use the arrows to spread their teachings, which has got me wondering if priest is just codename for fairy. Dolores the Sleeping Arrow uses St. Trina's arrows, and the description...
Wait, I kind of need to back that up. I need to, like, pay attention to that part. So yeah, I was just kind of lost in my own thoughts about how sleep is kind of connected to the in-between state of life and death and soulless demigods. And between the two D brothers, they share one soul. And so the one who isn't, like, in possession of the Xbox controller sleeps. So that might have some ties into this. And I was just thinking how much of a shame it was that we don't really have, like, purple flames associated with Destined Death anymore. But anyway, that's not too important. For anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about with that, in the 1.0 version of the game, Malekith had purple-style flames that appeared with his Destined Death attacks. So let me just pull up some footage for you guys real quick. All right. So in phase 2, rather than having a gold fleck that appears on his weapon when it's parryable, he uses, like, purple style flames. So it might not have really meant to amount to much, but... Alright, here we go. I'll just mute that, in case it's a little bit loud. So it's kind of always a pain trying to bait out these attacks. And then the last one. Okay. It gets better, I swear. There we go. So these are, like, the purple style flames that he used back then. And those are the attacks that were parryable. So I don't think I'm going to get too much else with that. Okay. So yeah, just some neat stuff, I think, from 1.0. And I think if that stuff still did exist in the game, it could mesh very well with how Ghost Flame is said to be the hue. With Gray Violets being said to be the hue of Ghost Flame in the English. The Japanese just says the flower of Ghost Flame. So at the very least, there is this weird connection between purple and calling spirits and sleep, perhaps. So, right. Isn't it implied we stab ourselves in the eye with the Miquella needle to subdue the flame of frenzied? I don't necessarily think that we need to stab ourselves in the eye, but I do know a lot of people believe that. I'm just on the fence about it. And 00083, welcome back to the stream. Nice to have you again.
Just like the magical flowers in A Midsummer Night's Dream. St. Trina's arrows are described as having a powerful sleep effect on their targets, and the priests of St. Trina would use the arrows to spread their teachings, which has got me wondering if priest is just codename for fairy. Dolores the Sleeping Arrow uses St. Trina's arrows, and the description describes her as the spirit.
The sad thing is, I backed up the video so I could re-listen to that part, and I was still not paying attention. Oh no. Oh no. Okay.
It's got me wondering if Saint Trina's arrows are described as having a powerful sleep effect on their targets, and the priests of Saint Trina would use the arrows to spread their teachings, which has got me wondering if priest is just codename for fairy.
Yeah, I don't think I would be on board with that, like the fairies of Saint Trina shooting people, but yeah, okay. Hello, Curtis. Welcome into the stream. Hopefully you tried to type I or L. I can't tell.
Arrow uses Saint Trina's arrows, and the description describes her as the spirit of a handsome archer who dressed in the style of a man. I would assume that Dolores must have some kind of close affiliation to Saint Trina as she uses their arrows, but the item description is disappointingly devoid of making any such references, so we have to make a connection ourselves. I'm assuming that the relevance here is to the themes of androgyny and gender fluidity, as these are very much associated with Saint Trina.
Hey, Morlord, you might as well add that to the Rebus bingo checklist right there.
Fiber cookbooks are described as records of crafting techniques left by a man who was utterly captivated by Saint Trina. He continued the search for her in his slumber. In fact, Saint Trina is never concretely referred to with male pronouns. The sword description reads, Saint Trina is an enigmatic figure. Some say she is a comely young girl, others are sure he is a boy. The only certainty is that their appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. And all of the other items either refer to Saint Trina by name or with female pronouns. However, all of the items related to Miquella use male pronouns, so it seems that this gender fluidity is only associated with Saint Trina, but not with Miquella. This could be a reference to tales of mythical figures that would change their appearance or change their gender, or maybe it's a reference to characters in medieval plays who...
So, as far as Saint Trina goes, her Japanese name is Seijo Torina. And so Seijo literally has the connotations of being a holy woman. So saint itself is kind of gendered in Japanese, and unfortunately that doesn't quite come across in English. And either way, I'm still pretty sure like most people are probably going to intuit that Saint Trina is supposed to be feminine, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Who knows? Did anybody in chat assume that Saint Trina was was male or anything like that? What else? Sword of Saint Trina. Okay. Okay, it says it's a woman, like a young girl or a young boy. Okay, so at least the Sword of Saint Trina is a little bit more questionable about that, but even still, it does use like the gendered terminology for saint. So it just seems like conflicting info within the game. Do I speak Japanese? Skoshi. Yes. You assume Saint Trina is Miquella? Yes, Saint Trina is Miquella. And obviously, like, a lot of that stuff is more subtextual, but for what it's worth, like, I think the easiest way to show that off is to compare, like, the lilies. So let me pull up the icons for you guys real quick. All right, we got Mike's lily plus Torina's lily. So as soon as you overlay one on top of the other, it's abundantly clear that the two are kind of related. So I feel like that's like the easiest, biggest clue that the two are related without any kind of explicit confirmation in the text. Okay, going back to the video.
Would cross-dress in order to disguise themselves and move about more freely. There's also the subject of Marika and Radigan inhabiting the same body. You can go check out my amazing video I did on that subject. But Saint Trina's gender fluidity might just be an inherited trait from Marika. Maybe the real Miquella inherited this quality from Marika, while the changeling Miquella is just a little fairy boy. We unfortunately don't know what may have become of the Saint Trina storyline, but I'm holding out hope that in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, we'll get to find out more. I'm still convinced that the figure on horseback that we see here is Miquella as Saint Trina, and I think this fairy theory completely supports this being the case. I also found some really interesting illustrations while working on this video that I could easily see as reference items to Miquella. First of all, if we do think this figure is Miquella, it looks identical to an illustration from a Swedish fairy tale about a princess who was kidnapped by subterranean trolls and was replaced with a changeling. This is an 18th century illustration depicting the fairy king and fairy queen Oberon and Titania from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Notice that they are sleeping in lilies. This texture of this fairy's gown looked so much like the wings of a nascent butterfly. And this image of a limb struck with polio looks so much like Miquella's arm that's hanging out of the cocoon. I know that
I feel like that last one is a little bit of a stretch, because I feel like it's kind of overlooking the weird bulbous portion on the thigh itself, which might be significant, but anyway. Hey, ViewLimit, welcome back to chat. You said Rico/Gico makes note of them being the same person, but obviously that's not in the final game. Right, and so within the final build of the game, it does become a little bit more difficult to tie Saint Trina to Miquella, but that's why I think having the two lilies overlaid on top of each other makes it a lot clearer for most people. Chubby Owl asks, can Saint Trina and Miquella be like Radigan and Marika instead being the same person? Maybe. I don't feel like... Yeah, that's like one of those things where it really just depends on one's individual interpretation on what Radagon is. Because there's certainly a fair number of people who believe Radigan to have been his own person, and he could have later fused with Marika, which wouldn't necessarily be super compatible with the Miquella Trina thing. Although maybe that works with like Kite Tales ideas of like the changeling. Maybe Trina is really Miquella and the normal Miquella is the changeling in her mind. I don't know how that would work. You don't like watching Miquella stuff because it just gets you antsy for the DLC? Wrecked. Hey, Tony Pepperoni, welcome back in.
Leo looks so much like Miquella's arm that's hanging out of the cocoon. I know that there's a fine line between speculation and plausibility, and I'm not sure if I haven't crossed it, but I really like this theory. The more I worked on it, the more I liked it, and it would totally allow the existence of Miquella to return from this fairyland dream world that he was taken to. I would have never even made this connection if not for Deracine, because Deracine is all about fairies, the pursuit of becoming a fairy, what it meant to be a fairy, and because FromSoft has a pattern of including references from other games, it really makes me think that fairies could be a part of Elden Ring, and Miquella being a changeling is a callback to Deracine. And Deracine is a French term meaning uprooted and displaced from one's environment, which is very literally what happened to Miquella. I hope you enjoyed the video.
And that is also what the worm faces are called internally, and so some have theorized the reason that why they're called like Deracine in the files is because some of them are like chilling sadly by some tombstones, so that might have been like an in-game or like not in-game, in-house reference to their prior work. Hey, nothingness. Sorry if your comments get eaten. Can't really control that. It sucks when that happens.
And at least found it entertaining. And I will have content coming out about Deracine, as well as some videos about Bloodborne, as I've been playing through that for the first time. Some videos about Fallout quests, some Red Dead Redemption 2 quests that have just stuck with me. Yeah, but I wanted to share this, and I'm going to try and get a video out weekly, so make sure to subscribe to keep up with that. And I want to give a big special shout out, thank you to my lovely channel members. Doomsday Zen, James Flack, Twisted Bishop, Solomon, Joey, Alexandra, and Nafwallen. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Alright. So that was another cute little video by Kite Tales. We did watch the other one first a little bit out of sequence, so I kind of knew some of the direction she was coming from or going to, which is a little bit sad, but nonetheless, I still like a lot of what was presented, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything, which is kind of the fun of exploring the lore with so many other people. Tony said, you don't know if somebody brought it up already, but you think Marika's the fairy, and she sealed rot in herself. This made the fingers choose her as the first Empyrean, making the Elden Ring. Yeah, it's interesting. I would need to think about that one a lot more, but I don't feel like there's enough text for me to like kind of immediately latch onto that one. What are some more Elden Ring bingo things? So, if we had to think of some random things that everyone's going to mention in a YouTube video about Elden Ring, obviously Miquella is Saint Trina, Marika is Radagon. There's more to go with it. It's a very bare bones summary. Okay. Ancient dragons were the true born heirs. Some funnier, oh yeah. Obviously anything relating to the Glowmide Queen, anything relating to Melina and burning the Erd Tree. Those are all like almost free spots on the Elden Ring lore bingo. And of course, just Japanese translations. Great Tree, Erd Tree, all that fun stuff. Law of regression causality. Margit is Morgott. Alright, so that was a good one by Kite Tales. I'm going to go ahead and link this in the chat for you guys. And if you want to give her a like and sub, feel free to do so. We'll go ahead and transition into Where Was Farum Azula Before Its Ruin by the Elden Conspiracy. And I'm assuming this one's a lot louder for you guys, because it is for me. Okay, I'm going to turn it down a little bit, and let me know if it's too low for you guys. It still seems loud.
Welcome to the Elden Conspiracy. Farum Azula is probably the subject I have covered the most on this channel, mostly because the area is fascinating with all its lore implications. When arriving in Farum Azula and defeating its boss, our understanding of the world of Elden Ring is turned on its head. Being a floating city, having been struck by a meteorite and a storm of mysterious origin, there are many indications that Farum Azula was once on solid ground, and connected to other regions. So in this video, I will examine the various extant theories about where Farum Azula was on land before it became a floating ruin. When we begin the game and look...
I kind of wish I was good at like Photoshop or something like that, so I would just connect all the pieces together properly and then try to put it in. Because it's... It seems like this part broke off and like twisted, and it should have like connected into this part and this part. It's all a bit all over the place.
Before it became a floating ruin. When we begin the game and look out on the breadth of Limgrave, one thing we all notice are the gigantic chunks of stone littering the landscape. Some of these ruins have a circular shape, and their carvings indicate they were made by an ancient civilization. The ruin fragment description calls this place a floating temple in the sky. These ruins of Farum Azula populate the western part of the lands between, specifically the Liurnia and Limgrave regions. Caelid does have several ruin chunks on its western side. The areas of Altus, Mount Gelmir and the mountaintops, as well as eastern Caelid and Grail's Dragonbarrow do not have Farum Azula ruins. I believe the locations of the Farum Azula chunks are vital to solving this puzzle. One thing to note is that the underground regions do not show any Farum Azula ruins at all. This shows that if the Eternal Cities were ever on the surface, they were probably sent underground before the lands between had contact with the Farum Azula civilization.
Yeah, that's a really good point and might be something that I would want to think about a bit more. Not, I don't disagree with what he said here at all. It's just in terms of my chronology of events, as well as like fitting the Nox into things. Because one thing that does really fascinate me about the crumbling ruins of Farum Azula is that they are on top of the what I call like the Royal Highway. So the Royal Highway was constructed before Farum Azula fell, and that's about it, because we don't really see the ruins of Farum Azula in more convenient locations to help place them in the timeline of events.
It is important to make a distinction here. We do see chunks of Farum Azula which fell off from the floating city when it was shattered, struck by a meteorite, presumably. But we also see in the lands between Farum Azula's style structures in Leyndell and Grail's Dragon Barrow. These did not fall from the city, but were rather built by Farum Azulans who came to the lands between. What's odd is that we see no Farum Azula ruins near these Farum Azula style structures, even though the Bestial Sanctum and Upper Leyndell show architectural evidence of Farum Azulan cultural influence. The ruins of Farum Azula itself are on the other side of the continent. It becomes even stranger when we explore the catacombs. As many lore hunters have already discovered, the catacombs were not built in Marika's time, but rather repurposed from a previous regime. In nearly every catacomb we see sarcophagi made in the Farum Azulan style. So some Farum Azulan people were interred here, or perhaps those ruled by them or associated with them in some way.
Yeah, it's interesting if you want to use the sarcophagi, and trying to talk about the catacombs in general is just a huge mess and a huge headache, and it could just be something as simple as asset reuse. So even though I do think the visual storytelling does play a big role in identifying some things, I'm not sure if I would just rely on the sarcophagi alone, but maybe I don't know of other bits of evidence to directly connect Farum Azula to some of these catacombs. So that doesn't mean like I implicitly disagree with it. It's just I don't know, essentially. All right, Elden enthusiast, you have a good night, man. Take care.
So, we have Farum Azulan structures in the east, fallen Farum Azula ruins in the west, and Farum Azulan burial rituals everywhere. It goes without saying that this vastly complicates any attempt to find the original location of Farum Azula, if it was on the lands between at all. Let's look at several popular theories of Farum Azula's original location. As has been observed by many lore hunters, the 6 divine towers form a hexagon around a very conspicuous cloud at the center of this sea in the middle of the lands between. Many have suggested this was perhaps the location of Farum Azula when it was on land. If we examine the footprint of Farum Azula, we see numerous bridges of varying sizes, radiating from a central hub. The architectural style of Farum Azula emphasizes concentric circular designs and circular buildings. The bridges which connect Farum Azula to the outside could have connected to the divine towers. But the divine towers themselves don't appear to have any parts broken off, or show any indication a bridge had extended toward the sea. Also, the respective styles of the towers and Farum Azula bridges don't match up at all. The divine towers were most likely built by the giants, or other culture allied to them. This is a completely different style and set of materials from those used to construct Farum Azula. So at this
Yeah, and one thing that I've also checked out with Farum Azula is the number of bridges extending beyond like the hub area is a lot more than 6 and don't like jut out from Farum Azula in a kind of equidistant manner. So I do cast big doubt on Farum Azula being like the literal center of the lands between, with the caveat of as far as the lands between are currently laid out. And I do think it is a very strong possibility that there could have been massive seismic shifts, either due to the shattering itself, or even whenever Godfrey and or Radagon became Elden Lords, because it doesn't make a ton of sense to me at all for Godfrey to venture down to Castle Morn towards like the end of his campaign, then go back up to like the Smoldering Church area by Caelid, and more or less ignore everything that's going on with Liurnia and Radagon getting his ass handed to him by the Ray Lucarian forces. So I do think there must have been other routes into Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula, rather than just the direct route that we currently have in game from Leyndell to Rea Lucaria to the rest of Liurnia and Limgrave.
At this point, I have to say Farum Azula likely was not at the center of the Lands Between's inland sea. Still, the cloud at the center of the map is intriguing. Seems almost deliberately put there to obscure something. For now, we can only speculate.
And I don't necessarily think that cloud is literally there, just like I don't think that a canoe with 3 people is literally there. There is a little bit of a shift in weather in the Lands Between, so I just think it's more like artistic liberty.
To obscure something. For now, we can only speculate. The next suggestion we often see is Farum Azula situated on the east of the Lands Between. We do find evidence of Farum Azulan people coming and building the Bestial Sanctum and 2 bridges in Grail's Dragon Barrow. Also, we see a mass grave in the northern part of this region, where the corpses of beastmen are embedded in stone, and the entire area is under constant rain and wind. While this area shows definite connections to Farum Azula, we do not see any ruins from Farum Azula itself. All the chunks from the actual city are on the other side of the continent. If Farum Azula was connected to the east of the Lands Between, wouldn't we see rubble in this area? But we don't. This complicates the theory. We've also heard it suggested that Farum Azula occupied what is now the Wailing Dunes. It does appear like a chunk of the landmass had been removed somehow, leaving the desert we see today. This area would definitely fit the footprint of Farum Azula, but again, the ruins we find here are giant ruins, not Farum Azulan. We find another inconclusive result.
Right, I agree with that, and to help support that other theory, even though Elden Conspiracy, wait, what is he called? The Elden Conspiracy instead of like conspiracy theorist. What the Elden Conspiracy theorist didn't necessarily mention was that it might have been possible for Farum Azula to break off the lands of its own accord, or like due to the storm or whatever reason, and not necessarily be because of the meteor initially. And it could have been later hit by the meteor, which kind of imbued the ruin sword fragment with its gravitonic powers, if you want to accept that terminology there. Errant Vice says, the geography of the lands in between is very Dark Souls 3-like. We have multiple lands with vastly different flora and climates, separated by cast vertical distance and sheer cliffs. Something clearly big happened, yes. And so we are told in the Mount Gelmir map fragment description that the topology of Mount Gelmir was affected by the shattering, which leads me to believe that it shouldn't have been a localized event, and then therefore the entire Lands Between was affected by the shattering. And we might even have some evidence of that still with how the map underground doesn't exactly have the Erd Tree underneath where you see the Erd Tree in the top side map. So it's a little bit down and like further to the left. So maybe there's something more going on with all that as well.
We find another inconclusive result. This is a less often suggested location, but I think it bears consideration. The west of the Lands Between is where we find the majority of ruins from the city itself. Around the Chapel of Anticipation, there's an anemic version of the storm at the center of Farum Azula. There are also numerous references to a true storm, which once raged in or around the area known as Storm Hill. Those who have watched my other videos know my theories about the Stormhawk clan, its relation to Stormvale Castle, and how I think the storm came to be in Farum Azula. I won't reiterate these theories here, suffice to say that the shared association with storms makes this area a viable location for Farum Azula. There is even a Beastman of Farum Azula boss we can encounter in a nearby cave. But we run into the same issues as we do elsewhere. While we see pieces of Farum Azula, which actually fell from the city, we don't see any Farum Azulan structures that were actually built here. All the ruins of old civilizations is either Giant, Old Dynasty, or Nox-inspired. There also isn't anywhere along the west coast which shows evidence of a massive amount of land uprooting itself from the earth, at least not in any localized area. If we go north to the region of Mount Gelmir, we find this odd whirlpool in the ocean, drawn on the map in a very conspicuous way. There is an object at the center of this whirlpool, which looks somewhat like a tree root. As far as I know, there are no item descriptions or writings about this at all, and Mount Gelmir itself doesn't show any signs of Farum Azula history. Each area, which seems promising, has several strikes against it. This remains an open question. We also have to wonder why every catacomb in the Lands Between happens to have Farum Azula sarcophagi. It could be asset reuse, or we can imagine in ancient times before the Erd Tree, when Farum Azula was in its heyday, people from there traveled far and wide, and if they died, were interred according to their culture's traditions. This shows that Farum Azula has been in contact with the Lands Between for a rather long time, since before the age of the Erd Tree, possibly. Yet even with this widespread influence, we still have no idea where the floating city may have actually been situated. Though we do see Farum Azula burial rituals in the catacombs and elsewhere in the Lands Between, if we go deeper, we don't see any evidence. The underground regions of the Lands Between appear to have no Farum Azula ruins anywhere. Some people may think this is a rather trivial point, but I think it's important to talk about. If the Eternal Cities and their old civilization cousins represent the oldest ruins on the Lands Between, we can comfortably say that Farum Azula, or the Lands Between's relationship to this city, is not older than the Eternal Cities, that these regions represent a pre-Farum Azula Lands Between, up until the creation of the catacombs. There is also...
And yeah, those kind of claims are very interesting to me, and I've wondered similar things myself, but I just don't think there's enough to really substantiate that. And well, I don't necessarily disagree with what Elden Conspiracy is saying here. I just would not be surprised in the least if the DLC flips the world upside down on our heads. Maybe even a little bit literally if you think about the Karian study hall. Hey Scalise, welcome back, and hopefully your pizza was good.
The strange redundancy surrounding the events of Farum Azula's ruin and the destruction of the Eternal City. Both of these civilizations were evidently hit by an Astel meteorite. Yet I think the complete lack of Farum Azula ruins in the underground rules out the possibility that it was the same Astel meteorite which destroyed both. These must have been different meteorites at different times. The flora and fauna of Farum Azula bears mentioning. Many creatures from the Lands Between appear here, including stormhawks, dogs, and the worm faces. The vegetation, though, is far more interesting. Most of the trees look the same as those from the Lands Between, except they look strangely drained of color, burnished like bronze, as if they were once gold. The deciduous and
yeah, and some of them are even like completely silver, not like silver, but like grayed or whited out, which is very fascinating.
Conifer trees we see in Farum Azula are the same models as those in the Lands Between. This could indicate a previous connection or simple asset reuse. There is this one unique tree model which appears to be in a state of partial petrification.
Technically, this tree model you can also see in various parts in Caelid, although the Caelid variants don't have any leaves on them. Actually, I would need to double check like the whole petrification thing, because I guess you could say that kind of looks like a skull, but maybe that's a little bit different.
These are the same trees we see elsewhere in Farum Azula inhabited by bestial skeletons. This could have some connection to the death root which has spread through the city, though this is a completely unique asset. There's also the cypress tree, another unique model we find in the parks and promenades. The worm faces are located in an area accessible by an elevator. They inhabit a lower part of the city, almost as if they have been quarantined off from everything else. They wear different clothing from those on the Lands Between. They are covered with seals, similar to the one on the back of Garok's hand, which keeps the Black Blade in check. So while they are the same being as those on the mainland, they come from a different culture. It is possible the worm faces manifested in both areas independently. But the most fascinating aspect of Farum Azula's design are the aforementioned bridges which radiate from the central hub. The ends of these bridges broke off in the course of Farum Azula's destruction. If Farum Azula was ever connected to the Lands Between, we should see the remains of the other sides of these bridges somewhere. In other words, we should see a clear footprint of ruined bridges leading inward, but we don't see this anywhere in the Lands Between. Given the lack of conclusive evidence, I would like to put forward a theory. that Farum Azula was never connected to the lands between, but rather was situated on a different continent. Many descriptions mention areas outside the lands between, such as the Badlands, the Land of Reeds, and several other unnamed areas. The Draconian preset mentions a land of ancient dragons, where life is short. Farum Azula is, or was, famously ruled by the ancient dragons, so the city may have come from this area. We also have the description of the ancient dragon cult's prayer book, which implies that Farum Azula is outside the lands between.
And for what it's worth, the Japanese on that book doesn't exactly say that it was never reached the lands between. It just says that it's not currently told in the lands between, essentially. So, kind of a big discrepancy there.
It's prayer book, which implies that Farum Azula is outside the lands between. This description could be implying that Farum Azula was ruined so long ago that none lived to remember it, or it could mean Farum Azula was never a part of the lands between to begin with. The war with the ancient dragons occurred far before the Shattering, when Godwin was still alive. I would also posit that Farum Azula may have been situated on an island off the coast of Limgrave. This would explain the ruins in that region, but there doesn't appear to be anything drawn on the map to indicate this, if the clues on the map mean anything at all. A lot of people may think of this as a cop-out.
In 1.0, there was like this weird little fishtail looking like section. Oh, I have a screenshot of that. Let me look it up. All right, so this is the current day version map of Elden Ring, and this is the 1.0 version. So there's going to be a couple differences. Don't mind the icon so much, because one I took from like a new game cycle. So in 1.0, if you look down here, we've got the weird fishtail thing that I was talking about next to like the Moonlight Altar elevator. And they removed it. And from what I recall, that might have been initially planned to be where the Halig tree was supposed to connect into. And then they changed it for obvious reasons. And they must have like changed that like super early on in development, really, because all that other stuff like relating to the snowfield. Anyway, it might have also connected to like a divine tower at some point. It's all nebulous. And now I'm not trying to say I literally think like, oh, Farum Azula definitely connected there. I'm just saying that if you wanted a spot somewhere on the west, maybe it could relate to that somehow. But I feel like no matter where you do try to put Farum Azula in the lands between, whether it's on the ground or even in the sky, it doesn't help explain why its ruins landed in so many different locations, unless you're like thinking they're literally being torn apart by this gigantic vortex that just hurled them across the lands between. And if so, I feel as though like Stormvale may be as good a location as any, because it would mostly affect Limgrave, which I do think has the most ruins, a little bit of the Weeping Peninsula, like one fragment in Caelid, so maybe it's a more of a Western style wind, and a decent amount in Liurnia, but yeah. Maybe it floated in from outer space. Maybe that's where the Newman came from. Who knows? East of the isolated Divine Tower. Yeah, and so it is a little bit weird that from this Divine Tower specifically, you can see Farum Azula, but in no other location in the lands between. The battle with the Stormlord flung them really far away. I don't know. It's all that Stormlord stuff is very contentious.
If the clues on the map mean anything at all. A lot of people may think of this as a cop-out, that we need a novel interpretation of the evidence to solve this riddle. But I think this theory explains much of what we see. While the ruined chunks of Limgrave came from the city itself, the Bestial Sanctum and the Farum Bridges were built by inhabitants of Farum Azula who emigrated to the lands between. To me, this is a better explanation for the lack of conclusive evidence of Farum Azula's location than saying the city was caught in a time warp or was banished from the timeline altogether. The conclusive evidence is on another continent. This has been the Elden Conspiracy, signing out.
Fudge. Okay. I don't want to talk about all that again. But anyway, I did like the video. I enjoyed that they gave us multiple interpretations to work with. And all of that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and link it into chat if you guys want to like it as well. Sorry how that happened. I don't know. Maybe I just didn't actually unmute myself. So as I was gesticulating with my mouse at my map here, I was trying to say that no matter how you do slice the Farum Azula thing, it just kind of leads into those problems that I was mentioning momentarily ago with the fragments kind of being everywhere, and that it could be possible that it was part of the Lands Between, maybe somewhere near the Farum Great Bridge area, and it might also be possible that the Lands Between were a kind of Pangea state at one point, and Farum Azula could have crumbled over that Pangea-style state, which could explain why the fragments appear in so many locations. So I've wondered whether or not Caelid, Liurnia, and the mountaintops are supposed to be connected at one point. And so if we were to take this image of the Lands Between and treat it like a ball of dough or something, maybe the mountaintops could be rotated to fit down here, or all this stuff rotated around fit up here. And so there might have been a more implicit connection between Caelid, Shifra River, the mountaintops, and Liurnia due to things like the trees found in each region, the astrologers kind of being a common feature between these different cultures, and the Nox and all that. So anyway, that idea might be compatible with his other continent theory, but I feel as I just mentioned again and again, no matter what you try to headcanon in with Farum Azula, you're still going to be left with some oddities, I feel. Asnex thought it was spread via an explosion of some sort. The same explosion could have tossed it into the air. Maybe. Okay. So sorry for being muted for so long. Thanks for letting me know, and sorry for not reading the chat. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and move into another video by Mr. Erik. This one is Runes in Elden Ring, History versus Lore.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel where, you know the drill by now.
What's going on? Okay, there we go. Just a little bit slow.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel where, you know the drill by now, we answer all the unanswerable lore questions by looking at source material. Today we're going to continue the Norse mythology series by looking at runes, asking why they look like eyes in Elden Ring, and putting that in a wider discussion around the use of body parts in the game, like hands and fingers. But first of all, what actually are runes? Runes are the Germanic writing system that predated the introduction of Roman letters in Northern Europe with the coming of Christianity. They developed during the 1st century and were adapted to be easy to carve on hard surfaces like stone, mainly using straight lines. There are a few related runic scripts which developed over time, but all follow the same principles, with each letter or rune representing a single sound.
I love how much this just has a college professor's personal Blackboard website written all over it with the font choices and just terrible resolution and everything. It feels like this text block was coded into the internet in 1994.
In addition, each rune also had a name. The rune for the letter F, for example, is called Fe, which means money or property. In Norse mythology, runes had mystical properties. The old sagas contain stories of the gods using runes to bewitch each other, or of people getting sick because of badly cut healing runes. Letters may not hold much mystery in and of themselves anymore, but runes still do as an exotic relic of the ancient past, particularly in history and fantasy circles, and crop up a lot in fiction and games. Miyazaki, as we know, is a great fan of tabletop games like RuneQuest, and was no doubt influenced by the way those games creatively, if haphazardly, used runes as everything from currency to magic items and all sorts of things they never really were in practice. Runes are treated with some inconsistency in Elden Ring, but are basically analogous to souls in the Dark Souls series. There are a small number of great runes which compose the Elden Ring itself and have certain powerful functions. The Elden Ring and the runes it comprises is a rather messy topic which I'm going to deal with in a separate video. The second type are the basic runes we find in the world or win by defeating enemies. At the start of the game, these runes appear as indistinct, blurry forms, but as we progress, they reveal themselves as eyes. We need to ask why these second type of runes look like eyes. This ties into a larger theme we briefly touched on before, and the answer also helps us explain things like the fingers. Body parts show up a lot in Elden Ring because a lot of what we see in Elden Ring is lifted straight from Norse mythology, where the entire worldscape is repurposed from body parts. If you remember Ymir and the primordial giants from the etymology video, his murder is connected to the birth of the physical world. From Ymir's flesh the earth was made, and from his blood the sea, mountains from his bones, trees from his hair, and from his skull the sky. This is a warlike, exclusively male creation story where matter has to be violently appropriated rather than birthed or created. Elden Ring takes this and gives it a bit of a Taoist spin, with a backstory about the world splintering apart from a so-called One Great and worsens through the shattering. In this scheme, body parts represent different forces, with their strength growing or diminishing in line with their physical integrity. Hands, for example, seem to have a prophetic function, but in this shattered and confused world state, they point in one direction with two fingers towards order, and with the other.
So, just the first thing that popped into my mind about like hands being prophetic was the old like playground game where you would walk up to somebody and say like, "Oh, I can read. I'm like a palm reader. Like, give me your hand. Like, oh, I see on this finger you're going to have like this amount of children. You're going to get married at this age. You're going to have a house that's this big. You're going to have a dog. And in the middle of your palm, you're going to have a pool." And then you like spit in their hand. For some reason, that's immediately what I thought of in terms of like palm reading with fingers.
Seem to have a prophetic function, but in this shattered and confused world state, they point in one direction with two fingers towards order, and with the other three towards chaos. Eyes seem to represent power. Weak, faded eyes are worth little, but complete eyes contain great strength. Two whole eyes contain Marika and Radagon's great runes and work as talismans. Isolated body parts like this seem to fit in with the general theme of brokenness and incompleteness, and strike me as a set of creative choices rather than ciphers for existing ideas. In other words, the two fingers are a new idea that fits thematically rather than being based off something specific. This is the point where lore theory needs to admit that not everything we see in games is going to be based on a pre-existing idea.
So I wish he would clarify a little bit what he means by like a new theory, or what did he say?
Two fingers are a new idea.
A new idea. Does he mean that in terms of the timeline, or just in terms of a new idea in relation to like Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin's world building? I'm assuming the latter because that kind of makes the most sense to me. But right, okay. You'd assume that you'd argue that the runes are more of a cross section of a tree trunk, but to be fair, it could also be eyes. Cross section of a tree trunk, that's interesting. I can see where you're coming from with that.
That fits thematically rather than being based off something specific. This is the point where lore theory needs to admit that not everything we see in games is going to be based on a pre-existing idea,
and we have to allow for creativity on the part of the creators. So how have we gone from early Germanic lettering to eyes and hands? Clearly, the game needs a form of currency, along with items that allow for more gameplay mechanics. Runes fill that criteria conveniently, even if in name only. My own view is that Elden Ring clearly draws a different line balancing gameplay needs and plot integrity. The whole thing doesn't hang together quite as well as Dark Souls did, but the compromises allow for the overall greater scope of this game. What do you think? Did FromSoft handle the rune system well enough, or did you find it a bit odd? Does the game feel coherent, even if you don't understand everything, or does it just seem full of holes and lacking in internal logic? Do you notice problems with gameplay mechanics, or more with the plot? As always, I'm eager to see what you think in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and like, and as ever, thank you for watching.
Alright, that video wasn't bad. I do wish he went into more ideas in terms of the runes being relating to the eyes beyond just the scar seals and the sore seals, or like the fingerprint grapes and whatnot. Because, I mean, that stuff is pretty obvious, so it feels like there is a lot of build-up, but not quite as much resolution as I would have personally liked. So, with that being said, Chubby Owl, you have a good night. And Stella B, welcome back to the stream. I should have mentioned that earlier. More like not everything in-game is based on a real-world thing. Yeah, that's the vibe that I'm getting as well. Errant Vice is a firm believer in Radagon being the final boss. That's something nobody can refute. So are you trying to say like the Elden Beast is Radagon, or are you just kind of making a bold statement there? I thought I was going to say something else, but I'm like losing my train of thought. All right, so let's go ahead and link this one into chat. He is indeed part of the final boss fight. Okay. Yeah, honestly, I'm not really gonna like this video just because it felt like it didn't really contribute that much beyond just saying that runes existed in history. They also exist in Elden Ring, and they're related to eyes, which, I mean, is pretty self-explanatory. So, yeah, I just wish there was a little bit more to go with it, and then I would have liked it, because I do enjoy a lot of the historical parallels that they had shown here, but just not enough for me, unfortunately. Okay, so let's go ahead and transition. Oh no, my link didn't go through. All right, so this is the link to Mr. Erik's video if you want to give him a like and or a sub. It seems he's been covering some other bits of Elden Ring's lore. And now we'll be transitioning on to what seems illegal but not within the Golden Order by JakeLight. I don't know if this video is going to be more of a shitpost or if it's actual lore. I'm very interested to see if it is true lore, because it sounds like it could be a very fun topic.
Hello, JakeLight here, gaming lawyer at your service. So a short appreciation statement before we start. Thank you to all who've watched my first video on Elden Ring lore. I was not expecting many to have shown interest, as this is a rather new type of content I'm intending to make. Nevertheless, thank you again to all who spent a bit of their time watching and even subscribe to the channel. I'll continue to make these videos as long as you are interested. That said, to those that have yet to watch my video covering possible Golden Order laws, this is a continuation of a mini-series covering everything about the governmental system of the Order before the Shattering occurred, so maybe only come back here after then. Do be warned, not only there will be major spoilers for the game's various stories, I will also be touching on subjects that will involve me mentioning and detailing certain sensitive and violent topics. So last time, we basically...
Alright, I appreciate the kind of warnings there, although I do personally think it's good to try to have as many videos stand on their own as possible, so I'll just kind of power through this and complain about it when I don't understand the references they're making. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive on in.
Covered what acts we know are considered criminal offenses within the Golden Order, and now we'll be looking into acts that the Order believes to be beneficial to its cause or compatible with its philosophical beliefs. Now, the goal here is to list out things which the Order has not shown to have been forbidden or punished anyone for committing, and may even be encouraged to do so.
Hey, Billy Caldwell, welcome back in.
Previously, we talked about how the Golden Order is very much against any faiths that is not compatible to theirs, such as worshipping the Fell God, Frenzied Flame, and Glowmite Queen. Even though they may be true, total destruction of a civilization is not always the end result. The Order has made alliances with factions that they were at war against and even integrated different societies and faiths into their own, so long as they do not pose a threat to the Order. Let's begin with one that is closest to home, the Crucible Knights. Although they can be found all over the lands between when you play as the Tarnished, they are one of the oldest military might that have fought for the Golden Order. According to the Knight's Armor set, it is said that they served Godfrey, who was the first Elden Lord and consort to the goddess, Queen Marika. With that description, you might assume that the knighthood was formed by Godfrey and had always been under his command, but that may be far from the truth, as there are many things that they do not share in common. Except for the Exmothis on Knight's helm and Godfrey's axe, they do not share any other similarities between their equipment, not even the weapons they wield. The combat skills that they employ are also vastly different. The Knights primarily use earthly incantations called the Aspects of the Crucible, whereas Godfrey was not seen to use any, and only ever relies on his axe and raw strength based on the fights we witness in the game. The only things we know for certain in regards to the incantations according to its description is that they are very ancient, titled differently from the other earthly incantations, and are derived from primal vital energies that is used to either create or power up the earthly itself, instead of worshipping it like other newer incantations. Even their armor.
So there are a couple things that the Crucible Knights do which are somewhat similar to Godfrey, especially with like as often as they stomp in their fight. But a lot of the connections between the Crucible Knights and Godfrey tend to be a little, maybe not metatextual even, but just roundabout in their connections because of everything relating to red gold, red tinged gold, primordial gold, and the Age of Plenty, like the amber medallions and sap in the Erd Tree. So, not that I've explained that super well here. I don't really feel like giving the full breakdown because I feel like I do that so often. I just feel like a little bit of a broken record at times. But at the very least, with the Crucible stuff being directly relating to the Erd Tree and the Erd Tree being relating to Godfrey, I feel there is that kind of very strong implicit connection between them, even if the Crucible Knights themselves may not be like almost any other being in the lands between. And one thing that I've wondered about them specifically is whether or not they are actually golems, because they don't bleed, which doesn't make a lot of sense if they're supposed to be a normal style knight, because most things in the lands between do bleed, even things that you might not expect to bleed, like Miranda flowers. But Crucible Knights do not bleed for whatever reason. So like Godskins bleed, Alabaster Lords, Onyx Lords bleed, Omens bleed, obviously. Misbegotten bleed. So they're just very strange to me. The Crucible Knights never even judge anything or perform a stage play, false advertising. I am not following what you're saying, not gonna lie. So yeah, the other thing that I did want to mention in relation to the Crucible Knights is it is a little bit strange where the allegiances line up now, because we do have the one rando Crucible Knight serving Tanith in the Volcano Manor. And so in some ways I do think the ideology of the Volcano Manor is very similar to those of like Godfrey, with crowns being warranted by strength. So maybe Rykard's philosophy is more akin to Godfrey's than many others. I don't really know. Maybe that Crucible Knight has a mind of his own and changed allegiances for whatever reason. Perhaps similarly to like the Banished Knights changing allegiances, because we do have Edgar serving Godric, and on one hand, it would almost seem as though Edgar shouldn't be considered like a true Banished Knight because he's tarnished, technically, mechanically speaking, and the other Banished Knights aren't. But anyway, I might be getting ahead of myself here. The Crucible is a stage play from the 60s? Okay.
Also described to hold the same primordial power, which in turn amplifies the power of said incantations. If such armor could only be forged before the Erdtree was formed, the knights may be much older than we thought. So the Crucible Knights were not established by the Golden Order, has connections to something called the Crucible of Life, and most likely originated from an older civilization. But
so that is also a bit of a bold claim to say that their armor could only be forged before the Erdtree came into being. I do understand the desire to say that, but I do think that just goes a little bit too far beyond the text for me to fully support.
Before the Erdtree was formed, the knights may be much older than we thought. So the Crucible Knights were not established by the Golden Order, has connections to something called the Crucible of Life, and most likely originated from an older civilization, but eventually became part of the Order. Whether they willingly joined or were forced to submit, we do not know. At the very least, the knights were given honors and the privilege to serve under the command of the first Elden Lord. Happy ending for them, right?
And obviously, what's this guy's name? I'm so bad with remembering names. JakeLight and I do seem to have an intrinsic disagreement on when the Golden Order exists in the timeline. So he seems to associate it with Godfrey and Marika, which is perfectly understandable because many people feel the same way. Whereas I am of the opinion that the Golden Order is a byproduct of Golden Order fundamentalism and is more a Radagon thing. And my position is that the Crucible is the Erdtree created by Godfrey and Marika, and isn't necessarily like the origin of literally all life, at least as far as like the timeline goes. I think it could be considered the origin of life after a certain point when everything starts getting blended together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all life that ever was came from the Crucible in my mind. So just to reiterate my theory again, the Crucible is the Erdtree as controlled by Godfrey and Radagon. No, not Godfrey and Marika. And once Radagon became Elden Lord, I do believe the Erdtree was changed, and the kind of Age of Plenty and Crucible officially came to a close at that point. Alright, so moving on to establishing different religions.
Despite there being plenty of dragons that are hostile wherever the Tarnished reached, the Golden Order did manage to make peace with them even well after the Shattering. There's not much mystery to this one. Ancient dragons that wielded the power of lightning once led a war with the Golden Order. Eventually they lost, but did not suffer the same fate as the Fire Giants. Instead, they had a truce and formed a new faith called the Ancient Dragon Cult within the Order. There are plenty of evidence supporting this chain of events, but I won't get into too much detail, because what we want to know is the reason. Why would Queen Marika, a goddess who would declare war and go as far as commit genocide against anyone that could pose a threat to the Order, would consider peace with colossal dragons, which according to the descriptions of both of Grandsax, had enough power to rain calamity upon the royal capital and cause Lionel's walls to fall? Regardless, before I give my answer, let's first be made aware of how and when the Ancient Dragon Cult was established in the Golden Order. According to the descriptions of certain lightning incantations, and I quote, "Long ago, Godwyn the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Fortisax and befriended his fallen foe, an event that gave rise to the Ancient Dragon Cult in the capital." End quote. So basically, Godwyn, who is a demigod and son of Marika, managed to defeat Fortisax, befriend it, and cause the Order to form a cult that worshipped ancient dragons. The text implies that it was Godwyn who called off the war, but is that really true? Shouldn't such an important decision be up to his mother to make though? From all the wars we know that the Order has fought in, Marika has rarely gone out of her ways to find reasons not to remove a threat against the Order when she is able to. With the Fire Giants, she cursed the remaining one to tend the flame of ruin for eternity. With the Glowmite Queen, she defeated her and had Malekath sealed away destined death. With Raya Lucaria, the only faction which the Order had trouble defeating, had Radagon married Queen Renala to have a truce. Well, this is where I suggest my theory that Godwyn was the one who convinced Marika to spare the ancient dragons. The demigod was the favorite child of Marika and Godfrey, since he was the only one born with no flaws or accursed blood compared to his brothers, Morgoth and Mohg. There is also the fact that Marika was greatly saddened for Godwyn's death when he was eventually assassinated by the Black Knives, which led to a shattering of the Elden Ring, which indicates he was or should be dearly beloved by his mother when he was still alive. Though Marika's affection for Godwyn is only somewhat supported from Ranni's narration, which she mentions very briefly via the game's story trailer, so do keep in mind of that. Godwyn also had a strong motive to save the ancient dragons, having bonded with Fortisax. He's most likely going to do whatever he can to persuade his mother to call a truce. Possibly one of the reasons given by Godwyn to persuade Marika can be found in the description of the gravel stone seal, as it
there is also the possibility that the war against the ancient dragons could have happened when Marika was in Liurnia with or as Radagon, and so Godwyn may have been the only one left of the demigods to really defend the capital, because the Omen twins could have been buried underground for all we know. But of course, a lot of that is very highly reliant on speculation, so take all that with a grain of salt.
It says, and I quote, "The worship of the ancient dragons does not conflict with belief in the Earth Tree. After all, the seal and lightning itself are both imbued with gold." End quote. A bit difficult to understand, but when you find out gravel stones refers to ancient dragon scales, and gold here refers to the Earth Tree's blessings, possibly implying that the ancient dragons and their lightning powers do not harm the Earth Tree, but actually has some sort of positive compatibility to it instead. So if the theory holds, there may be more than enough reason to justify the keeping of the ancient dragons alive and close to the Order, and it's all thanks to the power of friendship.
And then there is also the possibility to consider that Marika or the other demigods might not have truly feared the dragons because the power of the Flame of Ruin was lost, and then the Erd Tree may have been somewhat impervious to physical attacks, but we don't really know, and that part of the timeline is extremely vague because we don't even actually know when the War of the Ancient Dragons occurred. Because Vike was loved by Lansax, it could suggest that it should have been happened before the Tarnished were banished with Godfrey, because Vike is a Tarnished, and so it would seem a little bit awkward for all of his relationship with Lansax to occur once he comes back from beyond the fog into the lands between, but I guess it's technically possible, so that's why we don't really know what's going on with the dragons and all that. Morlord thinks the war against the ancient dragons happened right after Godfrey left. I would be more on board with that, except for the full Vike thing. Errant Vice says, does Lansax being able to present as a human imply that other ancient dragons could do so? Does that then further imply some Priscilla-style half-dragons exist? So I have mixed thoughts about that, and I'm kind of anti-Lansax being human despite what the game says, because it is written as hearsay, and we don't really have evidence of dragons turning into humans directly. Of course, the only kind of transformations we do have seem to be a byproduct of Silver Tier intervention, so maybe a dragon could have been reborn as a human, but I think it might be a little bit more likely that humans can kind of turn into dragons to an extent, but I don't even think real humans can become ancient dragons. So I don't even really think Lantax was ever truly a maiden, but I'm willing to be wrong about that. Godwin Fortisax Gex.
In any case, the only other faction that the Order has allied with, which we did briefly mention, are the sorcerers of the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Simply put, they are magic users that study and practice all manners of glintstone sorcery in the Academy, and were under the rule of Queen Renala of the House of Caria. Other than their relentless pursuit to understand the stars or moon to enhance their sorceries, there's really no reason for them to be at odds with the Golden Order. More likely, the war between the forces started due to the region where the Academy is located is just one of the many the Order has intended to conquer. Interestingly, Queen Renala proved to be a formidable foe, as according to the descriptions of the Carian Knight's sword, even though she had less than 20 knights serving under her, they were able to hold off even the champions of the Golden Order, which Radagon was one such champion. It is also suggested that there had been 2 attempts made by the Order to defeat the Academy, with there being First and Second Liurnian Wars according to the Sword Monuments. Nevertheless, the conflict ended with a political marriage. According to Muriel, the Pastor of Vows, Radagon decided to pour some liquid called the Celestial Dew on himself, apologized to Renala for finally trying to take over Liurnia, and swore his love to her. How romantic. Apparently, Renala was thoroughly persuaded, married Radagon, and even had children with him. Of course, if you know the secret behind who Radagon really is, or has been heavily implied to be, it makes a lot more sense how a mere champion was making all these decisions without Marika's approval, and was able to single-handedly end the conflict. I won't get into the intricacies.
So, as nothingness is talking about defeating God's army with undead soldiers with only like 20 knights, I do think it is worth mentioning in the 1.0 description for something relating to the Crucible Knights, they were listed as only having 16 of them, which is just a much smaller number than I would have initially expected. So, yeah, 19 is bigger than 16. Maybe that's why Liurnia was winning. I don't know.
Of it, since it is a hotly debated topic, but there are 2 popular theories as to the true identity of Radagon. First, Radagon is simply Marika herself, one and only sane person with the power to split her personality, or had dissociative personality disorder. Or, Radagon was his own individual, having specific origins and personalities distinct from Marika, and only until at some point in time had merged with her to become one. Regardless of what is the truth, one thing for certain is that Radagon had deep and complicated connections with Marika, and so it wouldn't be a stretch to say that his actions were highly influenced by the goddess, if not controlled by her. Unfortunately, the alliance spelled the end of Queen Renala, as when Radagon left her to become Elden Lord, she was left severely mentally scarred, betrayed by the Academy, and was abandoned by 2 of her children, Rykard and Radahn, to join the Order. Interesting thought to ponder though, could this possibly be Marika's way of defeating Renala through manipulation? If so, the goddess is as brutal as she is cunning.
And they had magic fortification and barrier of gold. Well, if that is any reason to suggest that faith builds need to be buffed, there you have it.
Due to the very narrow and strict beliefs of the Golden Order, many beings in the lands between are not treated with the same dignity and rights within its societies. So yes, discrimination is prevalent for anyone that is not compatible with the fundamentalism of the Order, and it usually comes in the flavor of physical violence or slavery. Albonorics, different from other living beings due to them being made by humans according to the item Albonoric blood clots. Most clues point them originating from the House of Caria, due to them having the aptitude for glintstone sorcery, and their silvery bloods just how Queen Renala utilizes larval tears, core of a creature of mimicry known as a silver tear, to rebirth the tarnished. And silver tears are artificial life forms that bleed, well, silvery blood as well. But because they are man-made, they are considered impure and untouched by the Earth Tree's grace. Now, who would take such a view on them other than the fundamentalists of the Golden Order? Perhaps it is the courtesy of Queen Renala, but Albinaurics can be found living in Lineville and Volcano Manor, though I use the word living very loosely here. They are at best treated as slave servants by citizens of the Order, but from what we can witness in the game, they are always the victims of physical abuse. We mainly see male Albinaurics tortured in two manners, most notably strapping male Albinaurics into these wooden contraptions found in Volcano Manor and Castle Soul, which they are immobilized in. Thanks to a Reddit user, which I stumbled upon, found out that they might have a real-life counterpart which is called the Scavenger's Daughter, invented during the reign of King Henry VIII of England. I'll spare you the gory detail, but it's described as a torture method by compressing the body like you were folding a paper origami. They could simply be a means to inflict pain, but my own personal theory is that these devices could be turning the victims into some sort of intruder alert too, as they seem to have caused them to howl reactively in fear whenever there are people nearby. The other method we have seen being used on Albinaurics is forcing them to wear some kind of black clothing around their heads, called the Black Dumpling, which states, and I quote, "Mask forced on a victim's head to lend torture an extra degree of cruelty. It magnifies one's fears and makes them acutely aware of all forms of pain."
Look at this guy with his arcane build. What's he doing? Farming items?
When the Black Dumpling goes on, the torturer no longer seeks answers, only to inflict suffering without hope of relief. End quote. The details above definitely suggest that its use is purely for sadistic reasons only, and from how they behave, even though their eyes have been blindfolded, it seems their hearing were heightened instead, so that their anticipation came only from the sounds of tools being prepared to be used on them. Evidence of these violent acts against the Albinaurics can be found in Lineville, Volcano Manor, and Castle Soul as well. That said, the majority...
You know, it's something that's kind of weird, that the Black Dumpling Albinaurics seem to behave more like beasts, despite having their heads covered. Does that mean shadows induce rage even in Albinaurics? Because shadows can be used to enrage like demi-humans and they all go mad at night. So is something similar going on with albinos? I don't know. Black dumplings remind you of extreme sensory deprivation as a torture method? Yeah, I don't know. All right.
Majority of the suffering happens mainly in Volcano Manor, being the place where Rykard and his Inquisitors performed many sinister acts. There are other torture implements that may have been used on the Albinaurics, like the Giza's Wheel, Inquisitor's Girandol, iron chairs, racks, and various blades, saws, and hammers. Though I have to add, we do not know if all the torture methods is actually approved by the Order, at the very least during its most stable condition, as we are inferring all this from the game's current timeline, where everything has descended into lawlessness. We can only hope the Albinaurics have not always suffered in the Order, but chances...
So Crunchy asks, what about the Mad Pumpkin Heads? That's interesting, and I don't feel like darkness truly messes with them, although I might want to reread that helmet, because it's not something I look at too often, because I do know blood loss and the sound of bugs triggers them, probably because of things relating to like the blood flame style bugs. But yeah, let me look up the Mad Pumpkin. And also welcome back to the stream. I don't remember if I said that. Alright, so the inside of the helm is pitch black, keeping the crazed warrior within... What did I do? I pressed 0. Okay. The inside of the helm is pitch black, keeping the crazed warrior within from panicking. Perhaps its rather roomy interior also helps alleviate feelings of pressure and claustrophobia. So, Dupling. Man, I can't type. Okay. Mask forced on the victim's head to lend torture an extra degree of cruelty. It magnifies one's fears and makes them acutely aware of all forms of pain. Okay, so maybe it is a little bit sensory deprivation. So maybe the Mad Pumpkin dudes have too much sensation, so the darkness and whatnot soothes them. But for the Albinorics, they are kind of in pain already or are actively being tortured. So that way, when the dumpling goes on, they freak out. And that might tie into the prisoner's mask? Let me think about that. Oh, it's Prisoner's Iron Helm, isn't it? Or is it just Prisoner? Prisoner Iron Mask. Iron Mask forced on a prisoner convicted of an appalling crime, thick, heavy, and utterly stifling. A foul creation designed to torment the wearer, either slowly fermenting hatred within their heart or a spiritual fervor that is near indistinguishable from it. Where did I want to look? Appalling crime. Okay, yeah, so just like heavy crime. Hmm. Hmm. Hatred within their heart. So part of the reason why I'm herming right now is because of Akui. Hold on, let's pull this up for you guys. So, ill will is spite. The first character for E. This is also used with like Estelle. Then he's like a falling star of ill intent, rather than an ill omen. So that might tie into the whole despair thing. Because when I was originally reading the Prisoner Mask stuff, I did think for a long while it kind of sounds similar to the idea behind like the Frenzied Flame, but I don't necessarily know. And then the final bit here, it talks about the hatred is kind of similar to a very strong will, and this will is used obviously for like the will stuff that we talk about all the time on the stream, like the greater will, the will that's related to like the Fia's champions, vitality, that kind of stuff. So that does tie into the whole idea of emotions being related to life and curses, because when you're filled with resentment, you become a curse. And so if that curse is kind of facilitated by strong willpower, that kind of goes in line with a lot of the other stuff that I've already been thinking. So I'll still need to think more about the darkness stuff. So if you guys have any more thoughts about that, of items to look at, let me know. Revan asks, did the Black and Silver Knights from Dark Souls bleed? You've always assumed these enemies are inspired by the old enchanted possessed armor trope. If you're talking about the... Oh, you're behind on the stream? Yeah, I was going to say, if you're talking about the Crucible Knights, that's a good question. I don't know if the Black Knights bled. I would not be surprised if they didn't, because they were like technically burned to ash. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Silver Knights did bleed. Well, I guess they're all technically illusions, aren't they? But good question. The dumpling is tight to the head while the pumpkin has space within it. I don't know about that. I feel like it just might differ between the two. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll need to think about that one a bit more. And thanks for the comment about that, because that's a good question to bring up.
This is Aslim. Moving up a little on the social hierarchy of discrimination, we have the Misbegottens. There's unfortunately not much information on their origins. Reading up on the Crucible Talismans and Winged Misbegotten Ashes descriptions, they seem to be born from exposure to primordial energies of the Crucible life based on them having inhuman traits such as scales, horns, wings, or tails. But because of advancing civilization, which most likely refers to the Golden Order, such features are considered impure, inferior living beings, and so were treated like slaves or worse. Prime example of misbegotten slave is Master Blacksmith Hugh. Through his dialogues, we learn that he was enslaved to help make weapons, whether for the Golden Order or specifically only for the Tarnished, we don't know. But we do know they don't like being slaves very much and were treated so badly by humans that they either planned a revolution, which happened in Castle Morn, or they searched for a safe asylum far into the northern regions of the lands between. The same could be said about the Omens, as they seem to be life forms blessed by the energies of the Crucible as well, growing horns, wings, and tails, but with added explosive accursed blood. Unlucky for them, they are born within the Order, and most would expect their children to be humans instead. So what did they do if their children were born Omens? Love and raise them unconditionally regardless? An Omen could dream of it, I guess. But according to the descriptions of the item, Omen Baron, the standard Golden Order procedure is to have the baby's horns excised, and even the chances of them surviving is extremely low. The burning question I have is why? Why do this at all? Because it doesn't turn Omens into humans, as we see plenty of the ones with their horns removed still look nothing like humans. They are also not treated any better within the Order. Based on the Omen Cleaver details, they were given weapons to fight in wars, but had...
So I think his question here is rhetorical, but if he doesn't answer it later on, try to remind me to do that. Maybe I should make a note of why are omens treated the way they are. Okay.
A curse that would break down on its own, indicating that the humans are fearful of being rebelled against by them. And possibly, because they are considered dangerous, they were also hunted by people calling themselves Omen Killers, wielding weapons forged from literal amputated Omen horns, which according to their armor set, the first of their kind, Rollo, was originally a perfumer, and perfumers served the Order, which is mentioned in the perfumer's armor set. But I digress, we still haven't really gotten an answer to our previous question. Why amputate the horns of the Omen babies? I have some ideas, but the procedure might have been mandatory by the Order. The Earth Tree is supposed to only bless humans and their descendants. If people started to think something is wrong with the tree, it is likely going to cause some serious unrest within the society. So instead, the Order may have shifted the blame on the parents instead, that they have sinned, thus their children were born cursed, and to cleanse themselves of their sins, they have to perform a ritual on their children. Whether the babies survived, it did not matter to the parents, as long as they themselves are once again blessed by the Earth Tree. This theory of mine can be backed up by the fact that not all Omen babies go through this procedure. According to the Regal Omen Baron details, if they were born of royalty, their horns are not excised but are secretly imprisoned underground for eternity. This suggests Queen Marika, having two Omen sons, Morgoth and Mohg, knew the removal of horns does nothing to help cure them, which means she and the Order facilitated with the infanticide committed, exploited the surviving Omens for war, and disposed of them when they are not needed, all for the purpose of maintaining the illusion that the Golden Order and Earth Tree is perfect. You know what the Omen choose?
So again, I do think part of their rationale is dependent on their worldview of the Golden Order kind of being instantiated with Godfrey and Marika, whereas my interpretation differs, and I do think there is a tangible difference between the Age of Godfrey and the Age of Radagon, which would help explain why the Omen are treated with disdain later on. But even in the beginning times, I think that can be explained with some other stuff that I'll get to in a moment here. But Ponyboy, I wanted to welcome you back into the stream, and Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, welcome into the stream together.
Children had to say about that?
Please, don't hate me or curse me. Please.
Well, that was quite heavy, but I'm sorry to say it's not over yet, because we have a couple more instances of discrimination to talk about, albeit a bit shorter. Trolls. Big guys which are descendants of giants once allied with the Golden Order to defeat their own kind in a war long ago, but somehow lost their minds since then. You know what the Order did to show appreciation for betraying the giants? Lifetime healthcare until they died? If the trolls were still sane, they'd be rolling on the ground laughing. Unfortunately, What they received was lifetime of slavery, performing all kinds of menial tasks for the Order, from guarding castles, pulling carriages, to mining precious stones with their hammers that were once used as ceremonial smithing tools. Hey, at least they aren't cursed to guard some bowl of fire for eternity, right? And now we come back to the crucible.
And isn't that Stone Digger troll so different because its body is like actually made of stone? I don't really think we have other trolls really like this.
That were once used as...
I mean, some are similar, but this one is just
smithing tools.
vastly different.
Hey, at least they aren't cursed to guard some bowl of fire for eternity, right? And now we come back to the Crucible Knights again. Nope, serving under the first Elden Lord does not save you from discrimination either. We know that Godfrey lost his grace and became a tarnish around the time he finished his campaign of conquering the entire lands between, and was immediately replaced by Radagon as the new Elden Lord. But what of the Crucible Knights' fate? There seems to be nothing suggesting that they were exiled together with Godfrey. Radagon did not take over the Knights, and there seemed to be no records of what they could be doing before the shattering occurred. Whatever the Knights wanted to do, without Godfrey backing them up, they too were despised by the Order. According to the Crucible Gauntlets and Grief's description, they eventually were seen as chaotic and deserving of scorn due to their strength and appearance, which explains by the time Godfrey and the other Tarnished returned home, the Knights were scattered all over the world doing their own things. Some remained serving the Golden Order, but most had absconded to either aid their enemies or escaped from all the conflict that the shattering had brought. Well, that's all the interesting but controversial things the Order were perfectly fine to do. It just shows the Golden Order upholds their beliefs, principles, and faith to the strictest degree. They would sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve that. Morality and ethics be damned. But it does sound like the Order doesn't feel like a country with proper governmental systems in place, but just making stuff up as they go. Do they even have things like a hospital, local authorities, or schools? Is it mostly just places of worship? Maybe we'll talk about it another time. For now, I'd like to know what you think. Did you find any of the things we mentioned to be inaccurate or disagreeable? Were there any other despicable acts I forgot to include? Let me know down in the comments. And again, if you enjoyed this video and like to see more of what I make, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Until next time, stay hopeful, but be critical.
Alright, so I did enjoy this video, even if I have some disagreements here. It's almost like my catchphrase at this point. Right, so to go back into a couple things, I went ahead and put some notes down here at the bottom of my screen. But oops, let's go ahead and like and share this video before I forget. If you guys want to give JakeLight a like and a sub. Alright, it's in chat now. Now, back to my notes down here. So a couple of things that they did mention and a couple of things that I took note of are that obviously Albinaurics are held to be anathema against the Erd Tree because they are graceless essentially. And so they're reviled by Cuckoo Knights and a bunch of other beings, sorcerers apparently. Then the other thing that I did want to mention is Rebirth seems to be explicitly detested in the Golden Order because of Renala's studying of the quote-unquote grim art of reincarnation according to Muriel. And to go along with Renala, I think you could apply that principle even further to things like the Deathbed Companions, because Fia mentions that she's like exiled and she says like the Tarnished might like scorn her or something like that when you like first talk to her, something along those lines. And so with the role of Deathbed Companions being lying with the dead, taking the remains of their lifely vigor so they can like die in peace, according, you know, to the similarities between the Deathbed Companions and the Perfumers at least, then they're able to kind of gestate new life. That would probably co-opt the cycle of Erdtree burial and potentially Erdtree rebirth. I don't necessarily know about that final line, but it might be worth consideration. And I do think that can also tie into Dung Eater and the Omen, with him implanting the seedbed curse onto the bodies of those he defiles. So for what it's worth, I think it's meant to be pretty clear that within the horns of the omen, there are kind of latent sleeping curses, and maybe also within the blood of the omens themselves, maybe the horns have blood. I don't exactly know where the boundaries lie between the two ideas, but for whatever reason, Dung Eater came upon the realization that if he took an omen's horn and put it into the body of somebody who died, it would stop them from being able to return to the Erd Tree. My rationale as to the way that works is because there is a curse within the horns of the omen, and my reason for thinking that is because only the omens that actually have horns use like cursed style attacks, and the more horns an omen has, the bigger the cursed style attack that it has. So all of the omens that have excised horns don't use any cursed attacks whatsoever, whereas like the ones with a ton of horns can like breathe cursed fire and shoot the projectiles at the player and all that nonsense. So anyway, curses are in omen horns, and the way curses work in Elden Ring as well as other FromSoft games is they're masses of negative emotions which cause things to get tied into the land. So they kind of infect spirits so they don't die at peace. And if something doesn't die at peace, it's not going to like leave its body and go on. It's going to technically remain alive because according to the Baldachin's blessing, in death there is only peace, because in death there can be no sensation. So this whole idea of feeling something is intrinsically related to life, and I think that comes up in a few exciting ways in like the Moog bloody finger. The finger itself is pale and drained of blood. However, the nail is said to hurt or something along those lines, and the nail specifically is said to have like the blood in it. So let me look up bloody finger, maybe that'll show it off. Oh, yeah. Let's go all the way down to the bottom. All right, okay. So, glistening blood has been siphoned into the nail of this finger. Its sickly pale skin feels nothing now, but the nail still aches with sweetest pain. So, blood has gold and whatnot. That's like not the too important part, but actually, it is the important part because the pale skin, this whole pale imagery is supposed to be coded to mean something being drained of blood. Like this literally like what somebody's face going pale is. The blood is draining from it. And so this kind of comes up in Bloodborne with pale blood. Not that that's like super obvious, but even in Dark Souls 1 and 3 with the cut off tongues for like Rosaria, I think, and the cut off ears, the proof of Concord kept, I think there's all like described as being like pale and essentially drained of blood. All right. So let me read chat real quick and I'll go back onto that tangent. It's odd that Rykard is anti-Erdtree in Golden Order, yet he still has Alban Orcs tortured for seemingly the fun of it. I do think there's a reason for that, and I'll try to remember to go back to that after I finish this tangent. You think the royal revenants are tied to the golden lineage since they're cursed? No, I don't necessarily think they're tied to the golden lineage. However, because they are cursed, I do think they're technically alive even though, they're dead. And I think that might be why they're super weak to being healed. Because when you heal something, you're taking away its pain. And if these things are cursed beings to begin with, then they only seem to be able to exist as a byproduct of their pain. So if you take away their aches and pains, they'll die, like literally, which is kind of what happens with the deathbed companions and the perfumers. Because let's look up Trisha. You wonder if that relates to Ensh's clinging fist weapon? Yeah, he might be a little bit different because he's soulless, but maybe. I would need to think about that one a bit more because he also drains life. All right. So Trisha was once known as a healer who dedicated her efforts to treating misbegotten, omen, and all those seen as impure. When her efforts failed, she was their companion as they died, watching over them to ensure that they could pass peacefully, free of pain. So if something is free of pain, that means it can pass peacefully. And this is a tale akin to the origins of deathbed companions, which is why I tend to think what I think about Fia and all that other stuff. And as I was mentioning in yesterday's stream, as well as on my gold and silver video, that the lively vigor that Fia takes from her champions is literally their willpower. And as I was mentioning earlier with like the prisoner's mask, willpower is intrinsically related to emotion. So there is this kind of a confluence of will, emotion, pain, and death and curses, which kind of all overlap. And so bringing that motif back to the Dung Eater, I think when he implants the seedbed curse, I guess I should just pull that up for you guys too. When he implants the seedbed curse into the body of somebody he's defiled, he prevents their dead souls from returning to the Erd Tree, and it's one of the most loathsome things found in all the lands between. So, Blackguard talks about how it's one of the worst things that you could do, and he's a little bit more explicit about it. Let's see if... No, that's... I'm trying to think. Okay. Kills the people and curses their souls. Does all sorts of shit to their corpses to keep them cursed forever. I ain't seen nothing more disgusting in all my years. I ain't ever been more scared neither. Rooted to the bloody spot. Well, he did all that to my friend. So, coming into contact with a curse might infect the person with the negative emotions of that curse. Therefore, they're kind of being haunted, so they're getting negative emotions by the curses, and they are getting cursed themselves, and then therefore they become a curse, which is kind of the principle of Dung Eater's mending rune at the end. Once everybody is cursed, they're no longer going to be returning to the Erd Tree. But if you do it enough, once everybody is cursed, it becomes a curse no more, and then they become blessed. So in a roundabout way, the mending rune of the Dung Eater makes it so that people will break free from the Erd Tree, if you kind of follow that train of thought there. Thanks, Bella. The worst thing you could do is unsubscribe from Last Protagonist and turn off that notification bell. Yeah. Alright, so we talked about Dung Eater and curses. Right. And so I think the reason that all three of these things are kind of related is because they go into this issue of having beings and their souls avoid the Erd Tree, or they take them out of that cycle of the Erd Tree burial, death, and rebirth, or however you want to distinguish it. So, right. As to why the omens are treated the way that they are, my current rationale for that is that because the omens have curses within their horns, and those curses are contagious, the people who wanted to return to the Erd Tree wanted to quarantine the omen, so that way they didn't continue to go on cursing each other. And the way that I think that works is because the omen are crucible related. They're being blended with all forms of life. And so having excess life within your body turns it into a curse. And this is something that's kind of consistent since the time of Dark Souls, and maybe even Demon Souls. I don't remember. The Demon Souls... Hey, wait. Actually, I think it was more explicit in Demon Souls now that I think about it. But I don't remember what item, so don't trust me. Yeah, the Crucible is supposed to blend all life together, and like I said, I believe the Crucible to be the first period of the Erd Tree during the Age of Plenty with Godfrey and Marika, which I think this is why JakeLight is running into some issues in trying to discern why the Omen are detested. So, while they're products of the original Erd Tree, they're also kind of antithetical to the Erd Tree because too much life is being leaked from the Erd Tree, and after a unknown amount of time, the blessings of the Erd Tree go away, and it starts to wilt and fade because such is the course of all life, as it is said. And then Marika may freak out and use Radigan to kind of understand her grace, so that way her bounties never run out and she never has to replenish them. And that might be why she searches the depths of the Golden Order to increase the quantity or the quality of their grace, or whatever she says. And so that might instantiate the kind of stasis that the Lands Between falls into once Radigan integrates his Elden Rune into the Elden Ring, which is why we have like the little cross hatch section prevent us from getting into the Erd Tree and ending the Golden Order officially. So the Omen stuff. Right. And so I think that's also why all of the things relating to the Crucible, like the Crucible Knights, became shunned over time, is because that represents an earlier period of the Erd Tree, and the current faith of the Erd Tree isn't as compatible with the initial time of the Erd Tree. So I think that might be why JakeLight is getting a little bit confused as to how, in his mind, the Golden Order could accept and then later seem to repudiate the Crucible Knights on a whim. Crucible equals barbaric equals bad or whatever? Yeah, kind of. Eldegusto says, you think altering the Great Rune has intentional and unintentional side effects, and the pruning of those root runes you see in Farum Azula results in damning the Crucible, blessing newborns, making omens. So yeah, I don't necessarily think it's just omens, because we also get like Misbegotten and maybe some other stuff, like certain beasts started growing extra horns and stuff, and like the Lion Guardians have a bunch of extra horns for no apparent reason. I think all of those are essentially blessed, so to speak, by the Crucible. Errant Vice says, searching the Golden Order is interesting phrasing from the being whom should know it better than anyone else, having founded it. It implies perhaps that Marika and Radigan lost track of what the Order was. Yes, I definitely think Marika had an idea of what Order should be, but it was kind of like the monkey's paw, or maybe that's a bad example. It's kind of like being a programmer where she set the laws, the code of the world into the Elden Ring, but she wasn't the best coder ever, and so it did literally what she told it to do, but what she told it to do isn't what she wanted. And I think that becomes extra obvious when she breaks her code with Radigan, because she realizes there's a bug or a flaw in the code, if that makes sense. You think the Lion Guardians are the Omen? Or at least you think so? All right. All right, Elden Enthusiast, thanks once again for dropping by, and you have a good night. All right, and so somebody else in chat said something earlier that I wanted to go back to. What was it? You were thinking it hurt because it digs into your flesh? No, so I'm assuming... Oh, wait. I'm not sure if Crunchy is talking about the Ensha thing or the fingernail, because it's been too long since that comment came up. But if it's the fingernail, I think the fingernail... I think the finger itself is hurting, and not that like the finger hurts us. Although it definitely does hurt us when we get inflicted with the blood. But let's go back to the bloody finger thing. Hopefully you're talking about this and not the clinging claw or whatever it is. All right. Yeah, but the nail still aches with the sweetest pain. So yeah, the sickly pale skin feels nothing now. So it's definitely talking about the finger, and there's nothing in like this sentence to make me believe that the subject is essentially changing. So it still should be referring to the finger and its nail. And just to double check the Japanese. All right, yeah. So it's pretty clearly that it's like the nail is suffering. Okay. And his weapon does too? Okay, what's that one called? The Clinging Fist? Honestly, that's probably like one of the items that I've looked at the least. Burial Axe? Nope. Clinging Bone. Horrific weapon made of a hardened skeletal... Damn it. Horrific weapon made of a hardened skeletal arm wielded by Ensha of the Royal Remains. Fitted by placing one's hand into the fist's grips until they dig in. O clinging creature, a king relinquishes not the hand. So is this in the life drain thing? What's it called? Life drain? Not rain, drain. There are 2 inches, you'll die on this hill, you swear to God. You think demi-humans and misbegottens are like bloodlines and species? Well, omens are like one-off cursed babies representing an excess of paradox from an imperfect great rune? Maybe. I don't know, because like even without the horns, they look different, although you might be able to argue that's because of like the blood. But it is interesting that misbegottens aren't said to have cursed blood, and part of me has wondered whether or not that's because like rather than getting excess like human souls or something like that, they may have gotten like excess animal life, and therefore like animals can't be cursed, which is kind of messed up, but maybe that's one way to look at it. Lifesteal Fist. I'm just going to type in Steel Fist. I typed in lifesteal with one word before, didn't I? Maybe I didn't. I guess it doesn't quite say it. Maybe it's just an interpretation of like the clinging. Okay, either way. Thank you, by the way. Alright, so somebody said something. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't remember what I saw, because I remembered I asked you guys to remind me of something. So if you guys remember, let me know, and maybe I already covered it. It's also an occult affinity, Ash of War, keep in mind, so it bears no relation to the Erdtree and is counter to it. Right, I'm not trying to say that like the lifesteal or the clinging fist is, but I think that idea of feeling pain like relates to being alive, and obviously that still does tie somewhat into the imagery of the skeletal mask. So this ritual implement relentlessly digs into the wearer's face, preserving one's human instincts while dressed in imitation of the Deathbirds. This is very similar to, I think, the Ring of Life in Dark Souls 2. Let me do this. Or is it the Ring of the Dead? Not Data of Dead. No, I know it's one of the DLC items. Oh, maybe I should just type in pain. Okay, here we go. Ring of the Living, that's why. This ring jabs into the skin, creating a throbbing pain that serves as a constant reminder of one's humanity. So, kind of feeling pain reminds you that you're alive, which is kind of self-evident, I think, when you really dive into it. It was about omen horns, why they're considered a bad thing under the Golden Order. Okay. So I did talk about that in a roundabout way because of me mentioning the stuff with like the tree and the crucible, and so I do think it's part of being relics of different ages and all that. Okay, so I did cover that. Thank you. There was stuff you guys are supposed to remind me of yesterday too. Oh no. Okay. So I think that might be it for me about this. Was there anything else that I forgot to think about with things that were contrary to the order? So no. I think it's mostly just being broken away from the Erd Tree. So obviously those who live in death. Did he even mention those who live in death? Oh, seems illegal but is not within the Golden Order. Maybe I was just kind of misremembering the title. Well, actually, yeah, those who live in death seem illegal at first because they're being stamped out by all of the hunters and whatnot. But according to Gold Mask, technically they shouldn't be considered like absolute evil. And within the greater confines of the Golden Order, they are technically accepted. It's America who has the issue with those who live in death. And that's why she chooses to break her programmer's code. Because in my mind, I think she wants the Erd Tree to represent her epoch of life. And with those who live in death being able to have a kind of sort of eternal life without the Erd Tree, that probably showed America that the Erd Tree isn't what actually blesses people within the confines of the Golden Order anymore. And so that might have been part of what helped push her over the edge to begin the shattering and whatnot. Does Ensha evoking the aesthetics and the mechanics of a Dark Souls Dark Wraith imply some similar narrative for the royal remains or remnants as a whole? I don't know, because like Ensha's weird because the true Ensha doesn't have a soul, but the person cosplaying as Ensha should have a soul. And I don't necessarily think he really drains the souls of others. What does Gold Mask know? He's just once in an age level sage. He knows how to dance and talk with his fingers. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next video. I'm pretty sure I linked this in chat. If not, I'm going to go ahead and do it again, just to be on the safe side. It was a good video. And now we'll transition into a little bit of a more meta gaming topic with Josh Strife Hayes' Why Modern MMORPGs Suck and How to Fix Them. Hey, Without Horns, nice to see you again. Yeah, bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Strife Hayes, and I love MMORPGs. I think they're one of the greatest gaming achievements in the last 20 years, and will continue to be a part of the gaming landscape for the rest of time. The ability to exist within and explore a consistent virtual world with millions of other people is a monumental achievement, and now we have more MMORPGs than ever, ranging from classical fantasy to interstellar sci-fi, servers for every part of the globe, games changed into multiple languages. With all this advancement, you'd assume MMORPGs are going from strength to strength, only improving. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. I've played MMORPGs my entire life. I've adventured through RuneScape, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, Runes of Magic, Terra, Neverwinter, Guild Wars 1 and 2, Aeon, Skyforge, and many more. I've seen years of advancement and gameplay changes that developers hyped and customers met with indifference.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that a lot of these problems are going to be partially due to monetization and trying to keep a live service game running indefinitely, with kind of a skeleton crew of devs for sustaining these operations. So not, of course, like most MMORPGs aren't completely stagnant, and we run into the issue of content drought, community drought, and community moderation, and the necessity of, sustainability and continuing to get money from its consumers. So With all that being said, I do think there's a lot of developments within the internet which make exploring the world of MMORPGs a lot more redundant, because when they first came out and really hit the scene with like EverQuest and WoW, the internet was a new novel place and was one of the only ways you'd be able to interact with people like around the globe instantaneously, because although there were like IRC chat rooms, most people didn't really have the wherewithal of like how to interact with them, and also like they're pretty straightforward and boring in a kind of way, whereas going through an MMORPG gave you a pretext to kind of have to be forced to interact with some of these people, or if not forced, definitely encouraged by the kind of inherent game mechanics. And now things have also been streamlined so much that the solo player experience very rarely is forced to interact with others anymore, because interacting with others also kind of sucks. So you're kind of left with this catch-22 of making the game solo friendly so that way you're not inhibited by other players. But if you do that, then you're kind of killing the social aspect of the game that you're developing. So anyway. Sometimes you wish you never stopped playing RuneScape. It actually has thinky quests.
I've seen player bases rise to the incredible heights of millions of accounts and hundreds of thousands of active players, and fall to the pitiful maintenance mode every dying MMORPG must go through before being shut down for good. But how has this happened? How can a genre so worldwide rise to such heights and then fall so intensely from grace? What is ruining modern MMORPGs? Well,
and then I do think like another component of what ruins modern MMORPGs are the players themselves. And this isn't necessarily like the fault of any one individual as much as it is like the fault of like a collective of individuals, which is definitely oxymoronic to say it that way. But this is kind of what I would argue would be a kind of equivalent to a tragedy of the commons in a video game. And for anybody who may not know what that is, to give a different crude example before I tie it into MMORPGs more explicitly, the tragedy of the commons is when you have a common resource that is shared amongst a group of people, and what can happen to that resource if there is kind of unmitigated access to that resource. So one of the most common examples of like how this could work is if you have a group of shepherds who have different flocks of sheep who graze this common land between the group. It is in each shepherd's individual interest to have their sheep graze this land so that way their sheep don't die or starve or all that stuff, so that way they could sell them for a profit at the market. But if all of the shepherds let all of their sheep graze as much as they wanted, eventually the land would be barren of grass, and then nobody would have grass for their sheep, and so the common area would be completely depleted. So what the hell does that have to do with players in MMORPGs? I think once you hit the highest levels of gaming, whether that be like metagaming or like raiding or whatnot, you kind of don't need to interact with it anymore. So you've eaten all the grass, which leaves a smaller pool of players to interact with that like higher tier of content. And it also, at least for MMOs, makes it so that you have to combat this rising tide of elitism, where if you weren't there at the beginning, you're behind and you have to run to catch up. And sometimes you can't catch up due to FOMO mechanics. And so there's a lot that goes into this, I think. Hey, formerly Fossil, welcome in. It's sad, honestly, your aunt met her husband playing WoW. When was the last time anyone did that? Well, I think now we also have like other social things to go along with that, but I do at least know some people who've like still met spouses from games like League of Legends.
Well, after almost 20 years of playing them, I think I finally found the answer. Let me explain. I started off by scouring Reddit, gaming forums, and asking my friends or Discord chat what they remembered loving about MMORPGs, what their favourite memories were, those never-to-be-forgotten adventures they'd warmly reminisce about. And even though I received hundreds of different stories, they all had several core themes. Let's take some examples and see if you can work it out. These extracts are from other MMORPG fans reliving their favourite memories. 2007 was peak RuneScape for me. Me and my mates used to hop in this Skype chat we had every night after school and all do our own thing. Some of us fished, some trained Slayer, and some just stood around trying to merchant and sell things. But every night before we logged off, we'd meet up and go kill a boss for an hour or two. It wasn't great money because there were so many of us the loot split was awful, but we had the best time together.
Hell yeah, just hanging out with the homies, slaying bosses. Sounds like a great time.
My guildies and I would stand around in the starting area and welcome any new account we saw being made, give them some basic items, and then follow them around for a while, making sure they were okay. Most of them would join our guild afterwards and loved how welcome we made them feel. We knew the tutorial was rubbish, so we had someone go and help them. I'd stand in the trading tunnel in EverQuest for hours flipping items, buying low one side and selling high the other. You'd spot other people doing exactly the same thing and end up with an intense rivalry, always trying to type immediately after them, so push their chat up off the screen first.
That's funny.
Back in Neverwinter, if you wanted to do a dungeon with a friend who wasn't the same level as you had to actually travel to that dungeon within the world, no group finder. So we'd load up on supplies in the main hub city of Protector's Enclave and ride all the way to wherever we decided to go to. Sometimes lower levels would aggro the mobs in the higher level maps, and we'd have to waste our supplies just trying to keep them alive, but damn, it was good fun. I remember trying to get into Runes of Magic years ago. The game had its issues, but the main problem was I couldn't find any advice online about how to do anything, or what certain NPCs or attacks even did. So I spent hours figuring it out and writing stuff down. I ended up with a little notebook next to my PC to check on whenever I couldn't remember, and ended up telling other players everything that I'd learned.
Isn't that super ironic that in some ways an inaccessibility of a game can make it more endearing in a certain way? Like, I remember old NES games like I always forget the title of it, but back then the guides were not nearly as robust as they were now, so you would need to make maps just to remember where you were in some dungeons, and they kind of suck having to do that, but it does build up more investment in the game. So it's like this weird catch-22, because now we live in a time of such fast and easy convenience. If you can't look up what you're doing in 20 seconds for like a video tutorial on YouTube, you're like, oh, screw it. And you're just likely to go on to the next one, or search for something else. So look at World Tendency. I mean, there's a limits to it, and maybe like World Tendency isn't the best example because it does come up so late in the timeline of gaming, where trying to figure out how the hell World Tendency works is just maybe a little bit limited by like how punishing the systems in Demon's Souls are, but I digress. You had friends who used to make maps for Mega Man games. Oh, that's funny. I don't know why I wouldn't think to like make a map of a Mega Man game. I have a pretty good memory for stuff like that, and a lot of the stages seem to be pretty small, I guess, but yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see that for trying to remember where like all of the energy tanks and like the power-ups are, for the X series at least, but maybe not so much for like the regular Nintendo ones. That happened with PT, didn't it? Crowdsourcing figured it out inside like a day or two. I mean, that stuff's happening all the time now. Wasn't it within like 3 days of Elden Ring being released, people were like asking and figuring out how to do like Ronnie's ending quest line? So The levels are small, but Nintendo Power cost the cash you didn't have. Yeah, sometimes it really be like that. Or just like hopping into like a game shop and trying to stealthily write down whatever is in a magazine and take it in your pocket for like cheat codes and stuff like that. Nothingness remembers their first Souls title. You kill Dragon Rider and the old Dragon Slayer first. I didn't know what lock-on was. Yeah, that's what I did the first time I played Dark Souls 2. I went through Hyde's Tower of Flame. I killed the Dragon Rider, which was a lot easier than like the normal mobs around that area. Then I finagled my way past that dragon, and then I fought not Ornstein in the little cathedral.
I have hundreds of stories like this from other players, but after reading them and trying to find the links, I realised something. There are two things MMORPGs did that made them great, and it's those two things that have been removed or reduced in a majority of modern games. Those two things are...
I'm going to assume like forcing social interactions and having like meaningful difficulty. And meaningful difficulty ties into forced interactions because players are incentivized to do that stuff because they can't necessarily conquer it with as much ease on their own. So like friction is very important in game design. And for a very long time, many games are designed to be frictionless, which I think is why Dark Souls has had a kind of cultural zeitgeist on the gaming sphere as a whole, because it doesn't really cater to that. Like, there's like, oh, here's some buttons, figure it out, idiot. Or don't figure it out, we don't care. You can't beat the game, or can you? And you're just like, yes, I can! And you just kind of go for it. So... Right, let's see what Josh has to say now.
1. They were not convenient.
Hey.
Convenience sounds like a good thing, and indeed, in many ways, it is a positive trait for something to have, but making something convenient isn't always an improvement. Let me give you an example to explain this. Imagine, at the top of a mountain, across a dangerous valley, hidden at the end of a raging river, only shown on a secret map held by a travelling trickster, sits a wise old sage, knower of many things. And this sage will share his knowledge with you if you can find the trickster, take the map, sail the river, traverse the valley, climb the mountain, and ask him a question. Many try.
I feel like this is the setup of a Joel Haver skit.
Few succeed. And after years and years, the legend of the sage grows and grows until everyone has heard of him, but few have ever seen him. Now imagine if the same sage lived in the middle of a major city and there were tour groups taken to him every hour. The second example has exactly the same end point as the first, talking to the sage, but the journey to make it happen has been made much more convenient.
Yeah, and as they often say, like, the journey is the destination, which maybe that's not the actual saying, so forget what I said. But anyway, like, the journey is more memorable than the outcome of the journey for quite a lot of people. And this has kind of been scientifically proven when you look at people who do, like, marathon races and things like that, that very often the person that the people that get first and second aren't as happy as the person who came in third, because there's like a lot more pressure placed on first to continue winning. There's a lot more pressure on second to become first, but third, you're third, you don't have that pressure. So you could just look at what went into like making that race enjoyable for you and kind of improving at your own leisure perhaps, and just taking it in stride, I guess. So I might not be representing like that whole study as well as I could, but it is a thing, and I definitely encourage you guys to like look it up yourselves.
Surely this is a good thing, right? Well, yes and no. It's good because it makes the end goal easier to achieve, and it's bad because the end goal of anything is not where the experience and the adventure and the mystery actually lies. It is the journey to the end goal. The seeking of the map, the sailing of the river, the crossing of the valley and the climbing of the mountain. The difficulty present in achieving an audience with the sage was precisely what made the audience with him so damn impressive. It was the reward for the completion of a task, and reward is directly and inversely proportional to the difficulty of the task required for that reward. Convenience makes achievements both easier to reach and meaningless to get. Every example I'd read out above lists a part of the game that was not convenient. The player drop splits not being personal, the in-game tutorial being useless, manual trading due to the lack of an auction house, being killed by mobs while travelling, or the lack of an up-to-date wiki. Convenience kills adventure. The easy...
And obviously there are like limits to this, and he's just kind of making a broader point here. So one thing which stands out to me, which I don't think really fits this paradigm, is something more relating to like a quality of life buff. And obviously like quality of life and convenience literally go hand in hand together, because making a quality of life adjustment literally makes something more convenient. So for me, I really enjoy playing Path of Exile every once in a while, but I absolutely hate how terrible it is trying to like trade between players, and more importantly, because like, you know, trading you could completely forego because like solo self-bound and all that stuff. But the stuff that I really don't like about Path of Exile tends to be stuff that is just like hidden mechanics that you really aren't going to realistically discover on your own your first couple times playing through the games. So for me, I really hate vendor recipes. And for anybody who has no idea what I'm talking about, in order to get certain kinds of currency in Path of Exile, you need to sell merchants specific quantities and rarities of items to get certain currency in return. And this stuff isn't ever really explained in the game. So for new players, they could really be missing out on a lot of currency as they're like going through the campaign. But even that doesn't really matter, because like once you get to the end game, you have different ways of farming currency, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. But my very first time like playing through the game and then like finding this out when I was almost done with the campaign, or maybe even after I was done with the campaign, I was just like really annoyed, because there were certain types of currency that I still wanted. And had I known, I could have like focused to have gotten some of this stuff like more frequently and built up a small stockpile throughout my experience. It would have made the game more enjoyable for me. So it's not as though inconvenience makes games better implicitly. There's kind of a balance to it, and you want like friction rather than inconvenience, if that makes sense. Joel doing Dark Souls 3 entirely in character is one of the best nights of your life. Beans and Rice is anti-competitive by nature. You don't have to convince you that third's the best. MMORPGs are literally the friends we made along the way. Yes. And yes and no, because oftentimes there is a kind of character connection that a player can have to their in-game avatar. But I do think we are in this section of the timeline in video gaming where we want to be able to show off our achievements to other people to feel validated, but in so opening up ourselves to that kind of external validation also leads into comparison of our current status with the status of others. And as they say, comparison is the thief of joy. So I feel like there's a very sharp double-edged sword here where making games less personalized and more publicized allows you to interact with others, which can be a good thing, but it also allows you to interact with others, which can be a terrible thing. Hey, IE Codman, welcome back to the stream. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Just phonetically, just type it out and I'll try to remember how to pronounce it. Having to give Covenant rewards one at a time is kind of bullcrap. Oh yeah, and Dark Souls 1 Yeah, 1 is especially bad. I think they fixed that by the time of 3. Yeah, they did. Okay, yeah. But yeah, in Dark Souls 1, it is absolutely terrible. Alright, going back to the video now.
The easier you make something to achieve, the less impact and personal pride that achievement will carry. Think about this in your own life. I'm sure you've done something in your life the hard way. The way others told you, don't do that, do this instead, it's easier. And you weren't quite able to explain to them, it's not about it being convenient. It's about being an achievement. That's point 1. Here's point 2. 2. They facilitated and rewarded player interaction. This may be a more complex point, so let me explain, and bear with me. MMORPGs are not good games in the tradition.
I can kind of see what he's saying with this, but yeah, that just kind of goes into like the quest of the holy grail of like the perfect MMORPG, where you have a very fun social game, but also a game that isn't dog shit ass garbage in terms of its combat and mechanics and all that stuff. So like, WoW is a pretty good game, but its combat sucks. It's really dated. You can't tell what's going on with the screen half the time. The bosses don't really telegraph attacks. There's room for a lot of improvement, but if they made the game so good to play solo, there's less incentive to play it with others. And as Stella and other ones in the chat have been saying, like, MMORPGs are unironically the friends we made along the way. So
traditional sense. Now, before you get angry, hear me out. If I bought a single-player game for full price and it contained 1,000 identical fetch quests, I'd feel cheated. I'd think the devs were lazy and using cut and paste for everything. So why do I allow this in MMORPGs? Well, it's because, first and foremost, MMORPGs aren't really games in the traditional sense. They're multiplayer experience facilitators. This is simply a fancy way of saying they give multiple players the ability and the tools they need to interact with other players if they want to. Want to chat to someone? You can. Duel them, trade them, add them as a friend, all fine. Meet up with a huge group and go destroy a boss enemy together? Go for it. MMORPGs give you the ability to share an adventure with other people. And here's the important part. They rewarded you if you did. Grouping up is often faster experience. Boss monsters require a team to kill. In-game professions cannot all be mastered by one person, so a team is needed to gather rare materials if you need to craft things. Now, however, many players are going through the game solo. While this isn't a bad thing by itself, I've personally enjoyed a few hours solo in Guild Wars 2. It does mean you're removing the multiplayer aspect of the game and focusing on the gameplay part, which was never, ever the main focus of the developers. A single-player game like The Witcher 3 or Deus Ex can focus on personal story, character interaction, world choices, and make you feel important, but the strength of an MMORPG, the single defining factor of that genre that makes it stand head and shoulders above other games, is other players. So developers will always place the majority of resources into making the multiplayer experience as great as possible. As an experiment, I played through multiple MMORPGs to check, could I reach the final level, the final boss, or the final dungeon, or experience all this game has, without talking to another real player? And
that's got to be a gargantuan task. Although I could see a lot of things being outscaled, especially like with expansion content. But yeah, anyway, Ponyboy said MMORPGs are basically just bars for introverts, and that is a true of a true that has ever been truly true. True.
Fortunately, the answer was yes. Looking for group tools removed the need for me to actually look for a group. Dungeon guides removed the need for me to ask and learn about the dungeon. And marketplaces or auction houses made it possible to buy and sell my wares without ever trading anything other than an NPC. In almost every example of a favourite MMORPG memory people sent me, people and the relationships they formed, be that friends, enemies, rivals, or in some rare cases, becoming real-life partners, were always present. People and players make MMORPGs what they truly are, and if you remove the multiplayer interaction aspect, you're often left with just a big world full of lonely people. So what do we do with this information? How does it matter? Well, here's what I truly believe will happen until MMORPG designers change. Players will demand convenience. They will demand things in the game become more obvious, easier to achieve, and more streamlined. The developers will supply these demands and introduce things like looking for group, teleport directly to dungeons or other players, auction houses to sell your wares, no penalty for death, and personal loot for everyone. Players will enjoy the convenience for a short while before realizing that the magic, the spark of adventure that was gained through overcoming the adversity of the lack of convenience has gone.
And this goes back into the whole double-edged sword thing or catch-22 that I was talking about earlier, that if no features for convenience are added into a game and it's just very inconvenient overall, while that can have a certain appeal and charm to it, there's also the very, very real risk of making the game feel like a Skinner box where you're just kind of constantly on this treadmill that doesn't really get you anywhere, and so you're less incentivized to stay on that treadmill. And that obviously tends to crop up a lot more once you reach like the end game content, but I do think it's a very real risk, and I feel like Destiny 2 is kind of running into the issues that Josh Strife Hayes is talking about right now, where certain things are making the game more convenient, but there's still like a lot of inconvenient things, and so like weapon crafting is now a thing, and there are like ways to do it, but the way that Destiny 2's dev team have been like implementing a lot of this stuff has been kind of garbage to begin with. Now they're starting to like finally repeal a lot of their garbage decisions, only introducing more garbage as they go along the way. So it always feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back with them. So there is an incremental process, but it always feels like pulling your teeth to get it. So oddly enough, it feels like a lot of players are becoming more and more disillusioned with the game, but I don't necessarily think it's because there's game issues as much as it is like they're finally getting to the point where they want to get to towards the end game or whatnot, and so they're kind of running out of content. And so how do you make a game good if it's not producing content quickly? You really need to make sure there's enough evergreen content to keep players always immersed in what they're doing. And I think that's probably one of the biggest failings of most modern day developers. And I don't even think this is an issue specific to MMOs, if that makes sense. MK1400, welcome in. It's an interesting concept that you never really thought of. Could you elaborate? Because I'm curious which concept in particular. Something about evidence is data mined or internal files. Internal files is a good one, or cut content. That'll be perfect for Elden Ring bingo. Stella says Zone Chat is why PC ESO is superior to console ESO. It's so much easier to talk and everyone is insane when actual conversations are happening. And then Ponyboy says you'd go so far to say that WoW was the MMO before the critically acclaimed 14? Yeah. And so At least with 14, they do have like a story that is compelling and does draw in a lot of players. And I don't know if like Josh Strife Hayes had played 14 at this point. 4 years ago, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, you can ask a lore question, and if you want to join the Discord, it's probably easier there. Alright, so, oops, I almost clicked the wrong stuff there. Let's go ahead and hop back into the video.
Through overcoming the adversity of the lack of convenience, has gone. Then they'll leave and forever roam the world looking for another MMORPG to recapture the feeling of magic from the first, never realizing the feeling of magic wasn't ever coming from the game. It was the feeling you got for overcoming obstacles and achieving something in the face of adversity. Players will then try new games, rushing through them and not talking to others in a vain quest to recapture the feeling of true adventure. They'll avoid
And I think for a lot of people, novelty has a huge effect on how they look at an MMORPG. Once you play your first MMO, you kind of have an expectation of what to expect for the second MMO. And then if the second one doesn't meet those expectations, it's a disappointment. And if it does meet them, it might not be as impactful if you had no expectations to begin with.
chatting to others because that's an experience waste. They won't join a guild because they want to play solo, and then after getting maybe halfway to the level cap, they'll quit, declaring the game boring, bad, pay to win, too hard, or too easy. They expect the game to give them the fun and the adventure and the magic. They will never stop and realize they used the game to find fun the first time. The cycle will then continue forever. How do we fix this? I'm going to tell you how we fix this, and you're not going to like it. There are 3 steps we need to follow to bring back the true magic of MMORPGs, and in order they are. 1. Realize and understand that every single MMORPG sucks in a different way. Yes, every single one. MMORPGs all have redeeming features, but they also all have terrible aspects. Combat may be great in Neverwinter, but beyond that, the game has virtually nothing. EverQuest has a deep character stats menu, but good god, the gameplay is clunky. Guild Wars 2 looks gorgeous and has fantastic jumping puzzles, but I hope you like using attacks linked solely to your weapon. Every MMORPG sucks in its own special way. There is no greatest game. There is no MMO that will unite us all. So please, as a player, stop looking for it. Pick one you can stand and give it a fair try. 2. Remove convenience. Quality of life upgrades are fine. I understand reducing 2 button clicks to 1 button click isn't going to break the community, but anything that decreases required gameplay time or removes the challenge of achieving a certain goal, be that selling an item or completing a dungeon, has got to go. Auction houses shouldn't be removed entirely, but should either be in a hard-to-reach place, extremely dangerous, or place very heavy taxes onto all items being sold to vastly reduce your profit and give an incentive to go back to player-to-player trading.
That's really difficult to do because, I mean, there's always going to be bots and like gold sellers, and they're going to always artificially inflate or, deflate the value of a currency based on their actions. So, setting that aside, what was it? Man, I had a point that I was going to make. Convenience. Anyway, I'll read chat. Nothingness didn't feel the pleasure of social interactions and WoW over the sound of salty gamers expressing their love for other players' mothers. What era of WoW did you play? Because I feel like a lot of that stuff has always been a problem, and moderation in general just needs to kind of happen for a lot of these games to work properly. So, convenience. Damn. All right, I'm gonna like back up the video a little bit just to hopefully jar my memory.
Auction houses shouldn't be removed entirely, but should either be in a hard-to-reach place, extremely dangerous, or place very heavy taxes onto all items being sold to vastly reduce your profit and...
Okay, I remember. So, I was trying to think of why you could necessitate somebody going back to the areas for old content, and that just reminded me of something that I've hated in World of Warcraft for ages, in that they have all of these expansions that take you to different places in the World of Warcraft, but they actually leave the quote-unquote World of Warcraft barren and unupdated. So Cataclysm changed a lot of things in Azeroth itself, but virtually nothing has changed in Azeroth since then, which I think is so stupid. Why aren't like more things added to Thunderbluff or the other Horde cities or like Alliance cities for players to have like their like races home city like be their character's home city? Like it's only ever wow, not Stormvale. Stormwind? Well, I'm drawing a blank, or Orgrimmar, for Alliance and Horde characters to just kind of congregate, or like occasionally Dalaran or the other expansion endpoint. And so if they started updating more things in the world to go back to, it would make the world feel more alive. You'd have newer players interacting with old players, seeing how badass they look when they go back into old zones, and aspire to be like those old players. And then old players will fondly remember their first days playing and be more incentivized to just randomly help out newbies. Like there's so much that can be done in MMOs that can extend beyond convenience, but I do think a lot of that does kind of come down to a little bit of lazy design, where the convenience overlooks why players want that convenience to be there in the first place. They don't want to travel through the world because there's nothing to attract them to do it, you know? So like I feel like it's going a little bit beyond the point. Not what like Josh is saying here, but just like game design in general. Hold on. Have the Stormwind auction house only sell stuff in Stormwind or Ironforge and Ironforge? Yeah, that could also be another way to encourage interesting interactions, or like having like cross-faction stuff be in like the weird places, like, I don't know, Dalaran. Maybe Dalaran's not so good, because you could also make the argument that's going to funnel players to those specific locations, but maybe if regional auction houses had like less taxes on certain items, you'd be more incentivized to go that way, to go to that like auction house. So like if you're, I don't know, an engineer, you're more likely to go to Ironforge because like metal and stuff on the auction house isn't taxed as heavily, or maybe it's like super taxed, so you might want to explore away from Ironforge. Ponyboy always thought a weakness of an MMO was the ability to level all the skills or jobs and not force players to rely on each other to trade goods they specialized in making. It's a little bit damned if you do, damned if you don't, and just like player economies in general is always really rough to balance. Is Dragon's Dogma an MMORPG? I honestly don't know. I don't know enough about the game in general. So many cooperating players in chat, you feel alien. Beans and Rice had the most fun in arena matches and random pugs for dungeons in WoW.
Give an incentive to go back to player trading. Looking for group tools shouldn't teleport you or your group directly to the dungeon entrance. Tutorials should give you the basics that you need to survive, and then leave enough mystery for you have to ask someone or research it yourself. You have to say, what is this thing and what does it do? But if anything removes adventure and replaces it with convenience, it has no place in an adventure game. And finally, this one's on you. Number 3, talk to other people. You are not the only person who wishes for MMORPGs to regain the spark of magic they once had. I'm willing to bet the majority of players want that feeling back. But there's a horrible truth we have to face up to first.
Uh-oh, guys, I found Velka. Velka.
That magical feeling of adventure, camaraderie, and fellowship comes from forming bonds with other people. And doing that takes time, which is both effort and an experience point waste. It is not efficient. You have to make the choice to stop going after experience efficiently, to stop pushing toward a numerical or item-driven goal, and actively build a connection, a friendship with someone else. In every MMORPG I play, I say hello when someone runs past me. Because of this, it will probably take me years to achieve the best gear, while others it may take months because I'm willing to spend the time being inefficient and talking to people instead of grinding constantly. If you want the unique connection that only MMORPGs can provide, you've got to understand that that comes at the price of efficiency. Spending time talking to other players isn't convenient as far as experience or item farming is concerned, but convenience, as we already know, kills adventure.
And this is something that like Asmund brings up a lot on his streams. Like he doesn't like to raid anymore because the more he does it, the more he realizes like how much time is wasted not doing the raid in terms of like dying to bosses, being resurrected, having to run back to the boss, having to summon players, needing a warlock to summon players. Oh, you don't have a warlock? You got to go outside. That's going to take at least 10 minutes for the 2 people to do. Oh, only one person ran out. We need another person to come out and summon. So there's a lot of added inconvenience to the World of Warcraft that a lot of other MMORPGs kind of have like solved later, where they like reduced trash mobs. They'll respawn you back in front of the boss. So it isn't just like convenience will kill an MMO. It's like when convenience is prioritized over like friction, which is a little bit difficult to say like where convenience starts and like friction ends, but maybe you guys are understanding what I'm trying to say with that. Yeah, I have no idea what that game he was playing was. Is it an Elden Ring an MMORPG? Technically, I would say no, because you don't have a lot of players in one shared instance, although certainly a massive amount of players play it. It is online and it is an RPG, but those are some kind of loose terms, and a lot of people's definitions of what an MMORPG may vary. Tony says, you don't know if this was brought up, but as a kid playing WoW, you'd get screamed at by plenty of adults during raids. You were like 8, it was scary. Yeah, so another issue with MMOs is also having to rely on people and people being unreliable. So it's not as though there is ever going to be a perfect MMO and a perfect player base to go along with it. And it's very easy for players to ruin the experience of other players. So there needs to be a very good balance between how much players are incentivized to interact with other players and also developing game systems that don't turn the players toxic towards each other. So I think Final Fantasy XIV does a very good job of making in-game systems which encourage players to want to cooperate with each other and like cheer them on. Whereas like games like World of Warcraft create more toxic environments with things like their Mythic Plus keystones. So for anybody who doesn't know what that is, like if you go into a dungeon, you can kind of turn on extra hard mode up to like plus a zillion, essentially, with your key. And so if you beat a key that's like a base level key, you have a chance to get an upgraded key to like, +1. So you keep doing that and you can get up to like +20, and each run is supposed to take like 30 minutes or so, but they can take like up to an hour. And if you don't complete your key within the certain allotted timeline of like 30 minutes, your key has the possibility to degrade. So if you're trying to get a +20 key, but you're currently on a +19 key, and somebody in your group screws up, or like their internet gets disconnected and you can't add another person into that group, well, now you've just wasted the last 20 to 30 minutes of your life. Oh wait, plus the extra 30 minutes that you're going to need to get your key back to your current level, plus the next 30 minutes to get your current level key up to the level that you actually wanted. So if somebody screws up your key and dies a lot and takes too long, you're probably going to be incentivized to flame them to play better. And even if you're just like trying to be helpful or just want them to actually play better, like telling somebody to play better doesn't actually help a lot of people play better. And insulting people doesn't typically magically allow them to play better either. So these games don't really foster positive environments that are conducive to success, I feel. That sounds like half your Mythic runs, yeah. Ever read Dark Legacy comics? Can't say I have. You didn't play 14, but played a little bit of 11. You can do anything in that game without a party. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. And you do need that like steady influx of new players or systems that will allow veterans to play with newbies, which is a little bit easier said than done and not quite as common as they could be. Yeah, as MK says, by the time they got into WoW, they guessed that most of their friends were just getting closer to being done with the game in general. And so that kind of really sucks that the track for newbies is not very well aligned with the track for oldbies. And WoW in particular is extra heinous about how long it takes to get Mythic Plus or even Raid ready. So yeah, it's just really rough. You quit because of the toxic communities and scandals with Blizzard. Old bees. Disparaging comments will continue until morale improves.
If after those 3 points you're thinking, where's my proof? What exact proof do I have that players miss the old MMORPG spark, the old magic only achieved by lack of convenience and player interaction? Well, old school RuneScape, a build of the game from...
Yeah, I knew he was going to say that because that's like everyone's always go-to. Old school RuneScape, and now we have a classic WoW, and even hardcore classic WoW, which is just kind of crazy that such old games can have such dedicated fan bases. But to be fair, like a lot of these games are also like really, really easy, and they just kind of make certain things a little bit tedious to do solo, but kind of a cakewalk to do as a group, which is kind of a phenomenal feat in and of itself, really, because you want something to be tedious as hell solo, so that way players do it as a group. And if you do it as a group, it becomes easy again. So that way, like, people are like, oh yeah, this is easy with a group. I'm just going to get someone real quick, you know?
From 2007 with player-voted updates, hit more than 100,000 active players recently, with millions of accounts made in total. WoW Classic is being hyped no end. An early game build removing years of updates and conveniences, pulling in audience of over 100,000 Twitch viewers. EverQuest 1 from 1999. Early builds of the core game are alive and well, with hundreds of people still selling player to player in the market tunnel and thousands of active players. I personally have recently started playing on the Mangler Progression server with none of the 20 years worth of expansions, and it's alive and well. private servers running the first or second builds and patches of many games still pull in thousands of pounds a month, providing players with that authentic, retro experience. There is a market there crying out for the magic to come back. To sum up, in the immortal words of Radchek from Starship Troopers, something given has no value. Whichever MMORPG you choose will not give you adventure, or magic, or fellowships or friendships. It will simply provide you with the tools needed to go and take that. That old MMORPG you're fondly remembering from your youth, and we all have one. Those days gone by with friends, adventuring and exploring. They didn't happen because the game gave you everything. Quite the opposite. They happened because the game gave you nothing and you took everything. You earned your adventure. You put the effort in to meet up with players, explore unusual mechanics, make sense of this complex world, and find ways to overcome the inconvenience. That was your adventure. You have, with any game, the interface to speak to others, the ability to walk off the beaten path and see what's over that mountain, the self-discipline to not Wikipedia every single thing and ask other players, how do I do this? But simply, you as a player may not be forced to, but you do have the freedom to say, I'm going to do this the hard way, because that's more rewarding. If we want MMORPGs to return to the glory they were once at, we need to remove the convenience that is holding the adventure back, and we need to put personal time and effort into connecting with people going on this adventure with us. If you're an MMORPG fan and want to game together, please come and join me on Twitch. I play a huge variety of MMORPGs and I would love to meet all of you in-game, whatever game that may be. I'm usually streaming 5 nights a week over at twitch.tv/Josh Strife Hayes. Thank you very much for watching and for your time. If you have any questions, comments or feedback, please leave a comment below or ask me on Twitch. I'll try to get back to all of them. Have a great day, and I hope to see you in game sometime.
Yeah, so that was another good video by Josh Strife Hayes. He does make a lot of really good video essays on the topic of MMOs and games in general. I was just laughing at Iman saying he sounded so lonely. I feel like he was definitely wanting the kind of old nostalgic experience to be back in a game, but I feel like the genie's out of the bottle there, and that a lot of nostalgia really just comes from novelty, and so you're not really going to get your first love back again, you know? Like, once it's done, and you kind of have expectations, you have a point to compare things to, and comparison is the thief of joy. I really believe that. So, Without Horns has been utterly bored by every single MMO you've ever tried. Yeah, I don't necessarily blame you for that, because I do feel like for most MMOs, like a lot of their core gameplay isn't that captivating, and it might have like a lot of time investment required to actually get to the very exciting parts of the game. I do tend to get really bored with the progression of leveling for a lot of MMOs. Like, I really enjoy the early game when you level up fairly quickly and you're like still learning things very quickly, and then you kind of plateau for a long time, and then you just kind of crawl up towards the end game. And then eventually once you get to the end game, then you can actually start doing like the fun activities. Oh wait, you didn't know how garbage you were at this game? Download all this crap to tell you how garbage you are. Redo everything you're working on. And so like it's a little bit ironic that in order to enjoy the games like later on for games like WoW, that a lot of it is kind of already solved with metagaming, which I think is also a big problem that Josh Strife Hayes didn't touch on quite as much as I thought he would. Because I feel like the culture around games and gaming has just drastically changed from what it used to be. And while we still did used to look up guides a lot back in the day, it's just having access to the entire world's knowledge at the tips of your fingers and having that knowledge be available instantaneously is something quite different from the way I grew up when the internet wasn't even really a thing, or if you did have internet, it was dial-up internet, and so there's a little bit of a time investment into whatever the hell you're trying to do on the internet, so you're very deliberate with how you used it. So, yeah. Playing with friends is what you want in an MMO, El Gusto? Yeah. And sometimes that's hard to facilitate because what you might be working on might not be something that your friends want to work on. And so it's kind of hard to fit enough space to allow friends to work together as well as strangers to work together. So anyway, I do think this is another good video by Josh Strife Hayes. I have already linked it in the chat. I think that'll pretty much be it for tonight, unless you guys have any standing questions or statements that you want to get out. MK1400 really wanted to enjoy WoW more than you did. You literally never even got to raiding, even though your friends would talk about how your friends talked about it would be why you got into it in the first place, to have that experience. Yeah, that's pretty rough. And the other thing that really sucks about games like WoW is the time investment needed, not just to get to the point of being able to raid, but also the time investment needed to even recognize whether or not you like the class that you're playing or the playstyle of your like class or race or like whatever in each game. So that is something that could definitely be improved for a lot of games. And as Josh Strife Hayes was saying, like a lot of MMORPGs suck, and I do agree with him. And so I do think we are kind of waiting for the holy grail of an MMORPG that's fun to play solo, but also heavily encourages people to group up and kind of create communities within those games. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for Ashes of Creation, but I don't really want to hold my breath either. Okay, so that'll be it for me for tonight. Everyone, thanks again for joining in the stream. Please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't. And take care. We will be going live again 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So stay safe. Hope to see you again. Last Protagonist out.